Every legend has an origin. Every story has a beginning. Every Superman was once just a man. Before becoming the Man of Steel, Clark Kent was just a young man trying to find his place in a world that was not his. Man of Steel / Avengers crossover. Superman in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Hello everyone, Omni-sensei here with What If Superman Was in the MCU? If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description.
Disclaimer: all rights belong to Marvel and DC. I own nothing. Prologue: Invasion. It is a signal to all the realms that the Earth is ready for a higher form of war. When Thor said those words, Fury didn't really believe it. The arrogance of an old civilization, he thought. Just a so-called god looking down on the potential of humans. But he knew, or at least he thought he knew, that with a little bit of time and a lot of effort, they could eventually become strong enough to defend themselves from any external threat. They didn't need permission from an alien to use the Tesseract. They didn't need permission to grow, to evolve. They could take care of themselves, thank you very much, and the condescending Asgardian had no right to treat them as if they were children. Fury remembered the anger he felt that time. Of course, this anger was very much fueled by Loki's scepter, but it had originated from inside him. Seeing the Kryptonians fly through the city buildings as if they were made of paper made him rethink that. Seeing the destruction a single Kryptonian ship had brought to the city, almost destroying the entire world, made him rethink that. Seeing the mighty Avengers, his last line of defense, who had managed to stop an alien invasion led by a god, completely outclassed and useless as General Zod and Superman fought in the sky, made him rethink that. Every single agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. was rethinking that, he noticed. Everyone's eyes in the helicarrier were glued to the screens as the satellite's images tried to follow the unbelievably fast and brutal battle of the two aliens. Nobody was speaking. Nobody was moving. The shock and helplessness were almost tangible in the room as S.H.I.E.L.D. realized that there wasn't a single thing they could do but hope for Superman to come out victorious. Fury hated that feeling. When there was a problem, he solved that problem, by whatever means necessary. That was what he did all his life. That was what the S.H.I.E.L.D. under his command was led to do. But what could he do now? When the Chitauri attacked, led by Loki, his team was pushed to the limits, but in the end they delivered. The Avengers won the day. Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye had been victorious. S.H.I.E.L.D. had brought them together to save the world, and they had done it. Things were different this time, because there was simply nothing they could do against that kind of threat. Against that higher form of war, Fury thought bitterly. His weapons were useless. The Kryptonians most likely wouldn't even feel them if they could hit the target at all, which was impossible to do since they were flying so fast that they were basically blurs. That was the reason he didn't even consider sending jets over there. They wouldn't be able to fly and maneuver quickly, and the pilots would just go there to die. Similarly, sending soldiers on foot when the city was falling apart was equally stupid. And the Avengers, they were most likely feeling what common agents felt when they stood side by side with them. That is, they were feeling, probably for the first time, what it was like to simply not be able to do a single freaking thing. The two members who could at least try to do anything were Thor and the Hulk. The problem was, and wasn't that a kick in the balls, that not a single one of them was in a position to help. Thor was inaccessible, doing who knows what, who knows where, since the beginning of this clusterfest, and the Hulk could only watch from the ground as the two aliens flew in the sky, unable to do a single freaking thing to get into the fight. Stark had been blasted from the sky and his armor simply wasn't in condition to fly anymore. Captain America, unfortunately for them all, hadn't received the gift of flying when he took the super soldier serum, thus he was stuck on the ground, helping the civilians dying like ants as the city fell on top of them. And Natasha and Clint, well, saying they were outclassed was a serious understatement. No, as much as Fury hated it, the only hope for humanity lay with a freaking alien, with a freaking 21-year-old alien from freaking Kansas who had never in his entire life up to that point thrown a freaking punch for real, against a living opponent. All he could do was hope. Natasha found it hard to believe what she was seeing. She had seen pretty amazing things in her time. She saw Captain America fighting with all the strength of the super soldier serum as his body moved with unnatural grace and force. She had seen the Iron Man fighting against a god on equal grounds, his technology proving to be a match against his opponent's supernatural abilities. She had seen Thor, the god of thunder from the legends, swinging his mighty Mjolnir, calling storms from the sky and defeating Chitauri soldiers as if they were nothing. She had seen the Incredible Hulk smashing his enemies with unstoppable force. But what she was seeing right now was on a whole other level. From the top of a ruined building, covered in dust from the collapsed city, Natasha could only observe as Superman and Zod battled. Each punch they threw was strong enough to break the windows of the still-standing buildings with shockwaves alone, and each skyscraper broke in half as their bodies collided with them. The concrete walls and steel foundations proved to be as resistant as a glass window would be against a nuclear warhead. She knew Clark was powerful. He had seen all the incredible things he had done when Fury had sent her to find the enhanced person who was helping people all across the globe. She had followed the urban legends that appeared wherever he passed and had interrogated the friends of the friends who had seen something. She had even watched footage of his previous battle against the Kryptonians in Smallville. But this, if anyone told her that shy, unsecure, overly polite kid she had met, because whatever Fury said about him being a potential threat was severely discredited once she met him and was able to assess his personality, could bring destruction on that level, she would find it ludicrous. Not that he was the one responsible for this. Oh no, she didn't think that for a second. Actually, she knew for a fact the only reason they were still alive was because Clark was there. But that didn't affect the surprise she felt at the level of power she was witnessing. It was as if the only limits he had were there because he had placed them there himself. His unbelievably fast speed seemed to only increase as he fought. His punches were getting stronger each time, and the blows he was taking, also increasingly stronger, seemed to no longer bother him the more he got into the fight. It was amazing, and at the same time it was terrifying, because as powerful as Clark was, he was equally untrained. It was very likely that no one was seeing this, but to her it was as clear as day. Clark had no idea what he was doing. He was relying solely on his gifts, because he had no training or experience. Instinct had kicked in, and it was all that was guiding him. No one would even attempt to consider it, but the fact was Clark was a civilian, an immeasurably powerful one, but still a civilian, and he was going against a trained general who had the same gifts that he had. Every single person in the city, in the world, was scared. But possibly no one but Natasha and Clark's mother would know that Clark himself was maybe the most scared person of them all, because he knew that if he failed, he, the civilian farm boy turned journalist, battling the high general of his people, the world and everyone in it would pay the ultimate price. It was a good thing that the symbol on his chest represented hope, because he would really need it right now. Clint tried to move as best as he could with his broken leg, while following the two missiles colliding in the sky, the thunderous sound echoing in his skull. That kind of shit was above his pay grade. He was an agent, a damn good one, when confronted with fellow humans. An exception or two could be made sometimes. He could shoot an arrow against an ugly-ass Chitauri, and nothing gave him quite so much satisfaction as dropping Loki from the sky with an explosive arrow. But what the hell did Fury expect him to do against beings who could fly faster than a bullet and shrug off missiles to the face? Nat had said it that one time, and she was completely right. They weren't trained for this sort of thing. This world was monsters and magic and aliens, and he was fed up with it. He needed a vacation. He needed to stay at least a weekend with Laura and the kids. But for that to happen, the super kid would have to win this fight, and Clint hated placing his family's safety in the hands of an unknown. But what choice did he have when faced with monsters and magic and aliens? Steve Rogers raised his shield over his head, protecting two civilians from the falling debris, while he guided them away from the destroyed buildings. Some kind of red energy beams had hit a building not too long ago, cutting it as if it were a hot knife slashing a piece of butter and striking 3 more buildings after that. Luckily, only the first one collapsed. The chaos was absurd. People were running everywhere, not knowing what to do. Steve was trying to call their attention, to make them follow him, and to calm them down. The subway was probably a good escape plan right now, and he was yelling orders to the police officers on the scene to take the civilians there. It was Loki's invasion all over again, except worse, if that were even possible. When the ship shooting the big blue laser was neutralized, Steve actually thought things were finished. Almost all hostiles had been defeated, and the only one left was General Zod against every single one of them. How bad could that be? Very, very bad, apparently. Steve had bragged to Fury once that there was nothing more that could surprise him, not after the super soldier serum, Hydra, the Tesseract, and having survived being frozen for 70 years. Fury proved him wrong with the helicarrier soon after. That was true. And then Thor and Loki managed to surprise him again by joining mythology and aliens in the story. And finally, after all that, Steve thought again that he had seen it all. He was wrong once again. What Clark and General Zod were doing was unbelievable. For the first time since the super soldier serum, Steve felt like the skinny kid he once was, full of courage but with no actual strength to make a difference. The simple fact is that there was nothing he could do against that kind of power. It was like trying to face Thor or the Hulk with his bare hands. He could certainly take a chance, but success was far from the most likely possible outcome. He took a deep breath, calming himself. Panicking now wouldn't help anyone. Things weren't lost. Clark was fighting with all his might right now, and he would trust the kid. He couldn't say he knew him very well, but he felt Clark was, despite being an alien, very much like himself. He was there, risking his life since the beginning, fighting against his own people to protect humanity. Yes, Steve was going to trust him to stop Zod. Maybe he and the rest of the Avengers didn't have the power to join the fight right now, but they began that as a team and the kid was a part of that. Alone they couldn't do a thing, but together, who knows? The Avengers had done it once. Dr. Banner's mind functioned at its most instinctual level when he transformed into the Hulk. So instead of a brilliant mind, top at its field, the Hulk resembled more an intelligent animal, grunts instead of speech, action and reaction instead of planning, and emotions instead of rationality. Except that, unlike with other animals, he didn't exactly possess a fight or flight instinct. His only instinct was to fight and fight, which was why the Hulk was, for lack of a better word, frustrated with how things were going. He was strong, too strong. He was fast. He could jump over buildings, but fly he could not. And that was why he was obligated to stay rooted to the ground, like a cat forced to watch a bird flying away. And it was pissing him off. His muscles were trembling with the need to smash. It wasn't simply anger. It wasn't simply fury. It was his instinct to hit and rip and destroy his prey until there was nothing else left. The Hulk was feeling something he had never felt before. He was being denied the opportunity to fight, and it was driving him insane. Deep inside his mind, Dr. Banner was trying to calm down, trying to rein it in before he went to look for another target to vent his frustrations and become a risk. Of course, his thoughts weren't as detailed as he liked, the Hulk side of his mind being in control, but the overall feeling he had was that this needed to stop. The Hulk was suffering because it couldn't fight. Dr. Banner was suffering because he needed to. From the bottom of his soul, Bruce just begged this to end, as quickly as possible. "Holy freaking shit," exclaimed Jessica Jones, for what seemed to be the 100th time, unable to blink as she watched Clark being tossed across a building so strongly that he came out on the other side and kept hitting the other buildings behind that. Jesus freaking Christ, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. What was happening just before her eyes was simply too much. In an automatic gesture, her hand clenched harder around Trisha's as her legs stopped moving from the shock of seeing her friend striking buildings like a bowling ball. Everybody who talked to Jessica for more than a minute could notice that she was a pessimist. Of course, she wouldn't ever admit it. She wasn't pessimistic, she would counter, but a realist. It wasn't her fault that reality was, by its very nature, shitty. So when the lights in her apartment turned off and her TV became blurry for no apparent reason, delivering a pretty ominous threat to the whole world by what seemed to be a psychotic alien, she knew they were in deep shit. It was the incident all over again. But worse, much worse. This was not only because the level of destruction was greater, not only because the Avengers looked as hopeless as everyone else, not because it seemed to threaten the whole world at once instead of a single city. It was worse because the whole thing was happening directly against someone she considered a friend. And as strong as she was, there was absolutely nothing she could do to help. So maybe she was a bitch. She wouldn't deny it. In fact, Jessica would be the first to admit it. She was violent, short-tempered, an alcoholic, and generally troubled. She liked very, very few people. But the people she liked, the people she considered friends and family, she would gladly kill and die for. And watching all this disaster happening without being able to help was like having a bullet piercing her chest, like watching a car coming in your direction without time to dodge, like watching your home catching fire and being unable to put it out, like being too far away to stop a friend from falling down the stairs, like being controlled by Kilgrave all over again, forced to watch from behind your own eyes as your body did terrible things without being able to do a single thing to stop it. "We need to go, Jez," Trish said, urgently pushing her hand. "We need to get out of here." Jessica didn't move or answer for a few seconds. She breathed and closed her eyes and then turned back, taking Trish with her. She couldn't help Clark, but she could help Trish right now. Clark would deal with this. He would kick that guy's ass back to space. And when that was done and he came back, then she would punch him in the face for making her worry like that. She just hoped she wouldn't break her fingers again. "Jarvis, I need eyes on them," yelled Tony Stark to his artificial intelligence while he tried to make a few critical field repairs on the suit. "Link every satellite, every camera in this city, everything capable of recording that you can find." "Right away, sir," responded Jarvis, transmitting the images to Tony's helmet. This couldn't be happening. Not again, Tony thought. It was like one of his nightmares since the incident, except he had never actually dreamt something this horrible. Shaking his head, he went back to trying to fix his repulsors, trying to keep his mind occupied and avoid freaking out. That was something. He really couldn't afford it right now. "Sir, it appears they left the atmosphere," Jarvis said, bringing Tony's attention to the images on his screen. He saw Zod grabbing Superman and basically exploding into the sky. After a few seconds of no updates, Jarvis added, "We lost one satellite." Tony raised one eyebrow. They were fighting in space? Could Kryptonians survive in a vacuum? Well, what can't they survive? After what they did against him and his armor, against even the Hulk, Tony wasn't exactly incredibly surprised to find out one more ability they seemed to possess. "Sir, they re-entered the atmosphere. They are losing altitude quickly." And then he could see them again, like a meteor dropping from the sky, burning debris all around them while flames seemed to surround their bodies. The pieces of what was probably his own destroyed satellite fell all across town, shocking against buildings, and the Kryptonians continued their descent, glowing red like a falling star. He could actually hear when they shocked against the ground, everything trembling for a moment. For 1 second, Tony closed his eyes again. He stopped trying to fix his repulsors and just focused on his breathing, trying once more to control himself. To be the man Pepper deserved. To be Iron Man, a member of the Avengers. To be the man he knew he could be. Armor or no armor. Because he fully admitted, even if only to himself, he never felt as afraid as he was at that moment. They crashed through the glass ceiling, knocking down a statue when its base made of stone broke down. Fast as lightning, Clark tossed Zod down and flew against him, hitting him on the floor and beating his head against the ground until the marble broke. Clark used all the strength he could muster to hold Zod down. He grabbed him in a chokehold, his muscles straining with the effort to simply hold him to the ground, to stop him from flying away and starting killing people again. Zod obviously fought to get away, grunting with the effort, the rage burning inside him. Even that, however, proved useless, because Clark didn't budge for a second. But for how long could he hold him down? How long until Zod managed to shake him off and go on his path of destruction? No help would come, Clark knew. Not because there weren't people willing to help, but because they simply didn't have the strength to help. There wasn't a police force there to handcuff Zod or SHIELD agents to take him away. There wasn't a single prison in the entire world capable of securing a being such as Zod. Zod stopped struggling for a second and looked at the people still there. Clark's breath hitched when he realized what the general was thinking. With wild eyes, Zod tried to look at Clark as best as he could while being held down. If you love these people so much, you can mourn for them. And fire came out of his eyes, directed at a terrified family. Clark used all his strength to pull Zod's head to try to stop the energy beams from hitting the family. The heat from the beam began to break the stone wall as the family hugged each other, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Zod fought with all his might as well, the beams slowly moving in their direction. "Don't do this!" Clark yelled, desperate. "Stop!" The family cried and fell to the ground as they moved away from the energy beams, with the father pushing his wife and children away while they begged for mercy. "Stop!" Zod didn't even hesitate. Never. The beams were inches away from the family, sparks flying, and the screams more panicked than ever. Zod wouldn't stop, not until every last one of them was dead. Clark finally accepted. Not until Earth was as devoid of life as Krypton. So he closed his eyes, the tears falling down his face, and made his choice. The sound of Zod's neck breaking would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. Chapter 2 And arriving in New York. Before the Kryptonian invasion, Clark couldn't help but open a big smile when he looked at the beautiful city. New York, the Big Apple, the most populous city of all the United States of America. He had never seen anything quite like that. Of course, having lived most of his life in Smallville would make it all the more impressive. Not that Clark hadn't left before. He had, after all, traveled a good portion of the world while looking for traces of his origins, but he had definitely never stayed in big cities, and certainly not one as impressive as this. As he walked down the streets, his big traveling bag on his shoulders, he tried to take in the sights as best as he could. There were people everywhere bumping on each other as they walked on the sidewalks. Cars, buses, motorcycles filled the streets, the noise they made surrounding the air. Music was blasting from inside the stores of every kind. The smell of different kinds of foods caressed Clark's nose, making his stomach growl. It was all so different from Smallville and the other places he had been that it might as well be on another planet. But, despite all those differences, Clark was really excited to be moving to the big city, to start this new phase of his life, and to chase his dream of becoming a journalist. It wouldn't be easy, he knew that. For all his work on the high school's newspaper and the several journalism courses he took, Clark still didn't have any real experience. So he was moving to a new city without a guaranteed job, with no previous references besides his old articles, and without knowing anybody in the city. And in this economy, as everyone would tell him whenever they had the chance, nobody was hiring. But Clark wouldn't let this bring him down. He had talent and will. That was all an honest man needed to succeed in life, his father said. And of course, there was the real reason behind wanting to be a journalist. It was a job where he could keep his ear to the ground, where people wouldn't look twice when he wanted to go somewhere dangerous and start asking questions. A job that would give him the chance to finally do what his parents, both adopted and biological, believed he could do, to use his gifts for good. Clark stopped at the crosswalk, waiting for the traffic lights to turn green, his mind wandering for a second, thinking back on how he ended up where he was. He had to admit it was quite the journey. After his dad, Jonathan Kent, died, Clark was numb. Everything he was, he owed to his family, and to have half of that family ripped from him so early was a shock. He simply didn't see it coming. A heart attack, probably one of the most, if not the most, common causes of death in the world, and it was something that he couldn't fix, despite having all those powers. He was devastated, he was lost, he was furious, and most of all, he was confused. Should he have noticed something? Should he have expected that? Because he didn't at all. The thought of his father passing away had never crossed his mind, not even once, and Clark didn't know if that happened because he was young, thus naive, or if he didn't see it because he was a superpowered alien who never got sick in all his life. Not for the first time, his unknown past plagued him with doubts. He didn't want to be different. He didn't like being something else. He didn't like not knowing what he was. And with his father passing away, he never felt so alone with his doubts. His mother was the one who shook him out of his depression, and the reason he left Smallville. Martha Kent was a strong woman and a very scary mother when she needed to be. She had told Clark not too gently that he had a choice. He could stay there, depressed into his little dark world, whining about all the problems he had in his life, or he could get up and do something about it. Don't know what you are? Go look for clues to see if you find something out. Feeling sad because you are different? Everybody is different. Grow up. Be your own sort of unique. Can't understand humanity because you are not one? Then get out of your bubble and try to learn something useful from other people. Feeling useless because you can't help everybody? Hone your abilities and use them to help those you can. Clark smiled a little bit thinking about his mother. She was a lovely person, but she could scare even him, a bulletproof alien, when she had to. She was the one that gave him the kickstart he needed to go out in the world. And go out he did, for years, learning everything he could, training his abilities, searching for clues of his past. Surprisingly, he ended up learning more about his own morals than anything else, at least in the beginning. He found out that he liked to help people, and so he did, as often as he could. It was by doing that Clark observed something valuable. Good actions generated good actions. All some people needed to start doing good deed themselves was a little push, a little example, a little help. And sometimes, in a world that could more often than not be unforgiving and harsh, that was the most difficult thing to find. So when Clark finally came back to Smallville, he did it with the sense of a job well done. He had done what he set out to do, and seeing the knowing smile of his mother when he hugged her made it everything worth it, as if she knew all along that he would succeed. The only one who needed proof was him, apparently. He spent a couple of months in Smallville after coming back, telling his mother everything he'd learned and seen about his experiences and his past, about his biological family and his people. Not that he hadn't told her before, an abridged version here and there every time he called home, but nothing could beat actually sitting down and talking while eating a piece of apple pie. He was happy. His mother was happy. And for the first time since the passing of Jonathan Kent, Clark felt he could finally move on without that bag of bricks on his chest. This journey ultimately led him to New York, to hopefully the beginning of a successful career. But first, before trying his hand into becoming a legendary journalist, Clark needed to find a place to live. And there was probably one place someone with no job, no family money, and limited savings that came from working in diners could look in New York. The neighborhood that was almost wiped off the map during the incident, Hell's Kitchen. Walking through the streets of Hell's Kitchen, Clark could understand why the prices were so sympathetic to his pockets. The place had been hit the hardest during the Battle of New York. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of the fight. Destroyed buildings, debris still on the sidewalks, big cranes making repairs. The Avengers had saved the world, but the aliens had taken a piece of it before throwing the towel. That piece was Hell's Kitchen. Clark felt his mood dampen a little bit. An alien invasion, an honest-to-God freaking alien invasion had happened, and he wasn't there to help. An alien invasion had happened while he was elsewhere looking for clues about aliens. If it wasn't so tragic, the irony would have made him laugh. Well, that wouldn't happen again, Clark promised himself. Not now that he had actually learned how to fly. Shaking off his bad mood, Clark began to hasten his steps. He was going to meet the real estate agent that had rented the place to him, and it wouldn't be very gentlemanly of him to keep a lady waiting, especially in this dangerous neighborhood. Susan Harris was tapping her foot impatiently. Mr. Kent was late. It was bad enough to be in this part of town for any amount of time, surrounded by the unsavory elements and the ruined landscape, but to be here waiting indefinitely was cause for worry. Hell's Kitchen change after the incident could be quantified between worse and even worse. Before that, it wasn't a bad place, full of restaurants of every kind, good places for people who enjoyed music and any kind of artistic performances, and in general, full of good people. Things like that tend to change when an alien army falls on top of it. The damage to Hell's Kitchen was astronomical. Several people lost their homes. The buildings that were left standing were in poor condition. Water and energy were cut off. Businesses had to close its doors. The situation now wasn't nearly as bad as it was a few weeks after the invasion, but it also wasn't nearly of what it was before it. Because of that, the prices had dropped tremendously. Nobody wanted to stay there. Nobody that had options wanted to move there. Supply and demand. Things would get better in time, she hoped, with how much work and money Union-allied construction was pouring there. But for now, prices were low, which brought Susan to her current predicament, waiting for a client that was probably poor as a church mouse, who she could only hope would arrive before she was mugged. It wasn't such an absurd possibility. Susan Harris stuck out like a sore thumb, blonde and beautiful, dressed in a form-fitting white dress and black high heels. She was surrounded by a bunch of people in old jeans and ragged coats going to work. Given the risen numbers of violence and assaults since the incident, well, she wasn't exactly crazy for being worried. "Susan Harris?" asked someone from behind her. "Finally," she muttered, turning to speak with Mr. Kent, an irritated look on her face, and as soon as she did turn, the angry frown disappeared, replaced by wide eyes. She was not expecting this, Susan had to admit. Mr. Kent was beyond hot, and she used the word only on special occasions. Tall, dark hair, the most gorgeous cerulean blue eyes, and oh my, did he have muscles. Big, defined, muscled arms, and she could only imagine how ripped his stomach would be. Clark cleared his throat when the silence extended. "Mrs. Harris, I'm so sorry for being late," he said sheepishly. "I guess I overestimated my sense of direction." The sound of his voice snapped Susan back to reality. Her cheeks were a bit rosy now. "Not at all, Mr. Kent. I wasn't here for long anyway," she said, suddenly cheerfully. She extended her hand. "And it's Miss," she added unconsciously, for her eternal embarrassment. She shook her head a little bit. "Susan Harris, Midtown Property Solutions. Clark Kent, but please call me Clark," he said, shaking her hand with dazzlingly smile. Strong hands, Susan thought, holding it a little more than what was socially acceptable. "So this is the place?" said Clark, since apparently Susan's mind was elsewhere. "Yes," he confirmed quickly, turning towards the entrance of the building. For a few seconds, Clark didn't say anything. "It's, severe?" "Yes, severe," Susan agreed, though the word she would have used is dump. "But don't let yourself be fooled by the plain look of the building, regardless of how it looks on the outside. It's very well placed. There are several good restaurants here. The subway is a few blocks that way, and at night there are a few good bars around, if you like that sort of thing." Let it never be said that Susan Harris was bad at her job. "Well, that doesn't sound so bad," he agreed and looked at her. "So, let's go in." "Absolutely." He crossed her arm with Clark's and guided him to the entrance. The inside was as gloomy as the outside, but without the sunlight to help. It was an old and unkempt place, not the cleanest either, she noticed. She pressed the button of the elevator as fast as she could. "There aren't many occupied apartments in the building," she said, as Clark looked around. "But you will share your floor with 2 others, if I recall. They probably are lovely people. The people of Hell's Kitchen tend to be very welcoming." The doors of the elevator opened, and they entered. When they arrived at the right floor, the doors opened, showing a long corridor with doors on both sides and one door right at the end. A woman was coming from that apartment. "There, that is one of your neighbors," Susan said happily. The woman approached the elevator with fast steps. She had black hair and very white skin, and was using a black leather jacket and old jeans. Her face, however, couldn't exactly be described as anything close to welcoming. "Good morn." "Piss off," interrupted the woman, sliding past them and entering the elevator. Susan shared a nervous look with a wide-eyed Clark. "Aha, Mondays, right? They can get to the best of us." God damn these people, Susan thought. If Clark hadn't already made a deposit, he would probably make a run for it. This building was terrible, and it was apparently full of aggressive nut jobs. Outwardly, though, she kept a cool face. They were already there. Nothing could go wrong anymore. She reached into her purse for the apartment keys when they arrived. The door, however, was unlocked and half closed. Frowning, she opened it. only to jump back when a man got up from the couch and pointed a knife at her. "What are you doing in my apartment?" She didn't even notice when Clark stepped in front of her. She was just suddenly blocked by his broad back. Oh God, this couldn't be happening. She didn't want to be stabbed, least of all in a place like Hell's Kitchen. She frantically looked for her phone, ready to call 911, only to be stopped by an alarmingly calm Clark. "Hey, there is no need for that," he said with a smile, walking forward. "He is not going to attack us. We just surprised him, right?" Clark kept walking, no hesitation, no sign of fear whatsoever. And despite the situation, Susan suddenly felt completely safe. "So what is your favorite? Crunchy or smooth?" For a second, Susan didn't understand, until she noticed the jar of peanut butter on the man's hand. The knife she was so afraid of was a kitchen knife that he was just using to eat it. "Crunchy, of course," the man mumbled, putting the knife back on the jar and scratching his nose. "Is there any other way to eat it?" "Not as far as I am concerned," said Clark, still smiling, stopping in front of the man. "So, what's your name?" The man hesitated for a second, looking at Clark. He looked terribly unhealthy, especially standing so close to a big, strong man as Clark was. He was thin, had black skin, wasn't particularly tall, and had a very high afro. He was also undoubtedly a drug addict. "Malcolm," he muttered. "I'm Clark." He extended his hand, and after a moment, Malcolm shook it. "I think I'm your new neighbor." Yep, but the thing is, I'm almost certain that this apartment here is the one I'm renting. Do you think it's possible you got confused and entered the wrong one?" Malcolm shrugged non-committally. "Happened before." Clark smiled again. "A friend of mine entered the wrong classroom once, when we were kids, went all the way back and actually sat down. Small town, people laugh about this to this day." Even Susan smiled. Clark's good mood was infectious. "So why don't I help you get to your apartment so I can let this lovely lady go back to her work?" "All right," Malcolm agreed. Susan moved out of the way and watched as Clark guided the obviously high man back to his apartment, the peanut butter jar in his hand. He held back a smile when the man turned to the wrong side again, trying to enter the apartment they've seen the woman leave earlier, and Clark had to turn him to the other one. When he came back, Susan couldn't hold herself back anymore. "Mr. Kent, I'm so sorry about this," she said fast, before she regained her senses. "This place is horrible. You have a rude neighbor on one side and a junkie on the other. The streets aren't safe." He interrupted her with a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, it's all right. It's not so bad. I'm sure after a good scrub this apartment will be as good as new. Malcolm is not a bad guy, just a little confused. And the woman, well, you were right. Mondays can be rough." This man was a saint, Susan thought. "I know that I can't expect much with a budget like mine." "You don't have to apologize, Miss Harris. You did the best you could and I'm happy." She could have cried right then and there. She hoped New York wouldn't tear him apart. He was probably the nicest person she ever met. "Well, Clark, if you are satisfied, so am I. Here are your keys," she said, handing him the keys. "But I must say, if there is any problem at all, give me a call and I'll see what I can do, okay?" He gave her a beautiful smile and shook her hand again. "I promise. And thank you, Miss Harris." She hesitated before turning, then added, "And, you know, if you need someone to show you around, give me a call too." And before he could answer, she gave him a saucy smile and left. Clark was a little bit shocked. He definitely wasn't in Kansas anymore. Shaking himself out of his stupor but still with a big smile on his face from being asked out by a gorgeous woman, Clark turned to look at his apartment. Despite his reassurances to Miss Harris, the apartment really didn't offer much. A living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. There was no TV. It was small and dark, and the furniture could very well belong to a house of the old USSR. He was pretty sure the fridge actually was from East Germany. Well, there was nothing he could do for now. He tossed his bag on the couch, opened it, and used his super speed to put his stuff in the designated places all over the apartment in a few seconds. Tomorrow he would have to buy some food and cleaning products, and a broom. He couldn't forget a broom, because the amount of dust that rose when he ran made him feel as if he were in the middle of a sandstorm. But now there was no time to clean his new home. Now Clark was going out and, hopefully when he got back, he would be employed. He took the list from his pocket where he had written the names and addresses of the main newspapers of New York, opened the door, and left. Today was going to be a good day, Clark thought. Natasha Romanoff walked quickly through the corridors of the Triskelion Field's headquarters in Washington, D.C. As quickly as she walked, though, the people who crossed her path moved even quicker out of her way. Natasha was an intimidating woman. There were several factors that contributed to it, like her confidence, her phenomenal good looks, her immense sharpness and perspicacity, her no-nonsense attitude, and her Avengers membership. Her ability to kill any person, armed or unarmed, trained or untrained, using any kind of weapon, or simply her bare hands probably was a factor too. She stopped in front of a door and knocked, entering soon after without waiting for permission. "You called?" she asked, a little smile on her face. Nick Fury didn't even turn his chair. "I have a job for you," he said, still looking through the big window of his office. Fury's office was a beautiful room, modestly furnished, bright, and with a lot of space. There were screens on the wall in front of his desk, and behind it, a striking view of the city. Natasha walked with the sureness of someone who had been there several times and sat on a chair by Fury's desk. "I do hope it's better than the last one," she said, making herself comfortable on the leather chair. Can you even imagine how tedious it was to observe a mob's accountant? The man was so predictably boring that one day he mistook sweetener for sugar after pouring it into his coffee, and instead of drinking it, he bought another one. "I actually thought you were punishing me for something." Nick gave her a little smile. "They can't all be alien invasions, can they?" "Well, if those are my two options, I take the accountant." She rolled her eyes. "But we'll see how long it takes until I wish another alien invasion upon us." "How about something in between?" Fury asked. Natasha raised her eyebrows slightly, even if inside she felt a bit more surprised than that. "What do you mean?" Fury turned one of his monitors so she could see it. 3.5 months ago, the Canadian Army found something buried in thick ice in Ellesmere Island. They didn't have the equipment necessary to know what exactly it was, so they made a joint operation with the American Army to find out what they could. "We didn't send anyone with them?" Natasha asked, her eyes on the screen. "Of course we did, just not officially. But a previously associate of ours was invited because of her expertise, Dr. Jane Foster, and of course her ass, Miss Darcy Lewis. As I understand, they tried to contact Eric Selvig, but as you probably know, he still is treating himself because of the number Loki did on his mind." She liked where this was going less and less. "What could an astrophysicist know about an object trapped in ice?" he asked, already guessing the answer. He didn't disappoint her. It wasn't about where the object was at the moment, but where it was 20,000 years ago, out of this planet. There was a stream of curses in Russian. "Yes, that was exactly what I said too, only in English," Fury replied, laughing ironically. "But wait, it gets even better. One day after Dr. Foster arrived, that was a huge tremor. The specialists would have thought it was an earthquake, if not for the fact that several lights turned on beneath the ice, and, suddenly, an alien spaceship rose to sky and disappeared into the night." Her eyes closed for a moment as she refrained from cursing again. "They lost an alien ship?" she asked, her voice perfectly calm. "They did," confirmed Fury. "They weren't exactly equipped to chase it, and the ship simply doesn't show in our sensors. It either buried itself back on ice, or its technology is too advanced to be noticed by ours," he completed. "Precisely. We have no idea where this thing is." He tilted his head, "But at least it isn't killing people. Nobody there died. The ship just took off." Romanoff studied the screen again, seeing the grainy images from the ship. "What's the other lead you have then?" she asked, knowing she was there for a reason. Fury smiled. "There is one. The Canadian forces hired a company called Arctic Cargo to transport everything they needed. There were 67 workers when they arrived. After the ship left, there were only 66. After analysis, we reached the oh-so-surprising conclusion that his documents were fake, and that left us without a name or a picture." How do you know it isn't simply an illegal who left after things became too heated? Because of the testimony of our Norse god's old friend, Darcy Lewis. I can't even begin to quote from memory, so let me read it. Here it is. He looked at the text on the screen and read, "He totally saved our lives when the killer robot attacked and almost killed Jane. He just appeared and ARGHH ripped the thing in two with his bare hands. How did he look? Wow, where do I begin? He was a dark-haired, hunky, blue-eyed beefcake of a man, and I wanted to bite him. I told Jane that I have dibs on this one. She can't just get all the good-looking aliens for herself. How do I know he is an alien? That's a stupid question. He operated on Jane with laser eyes. He went ARGHH and destroyed a robot. What else could he be? Captain Canada, who was also frozen in ice. It was a testament to Natasha's training that she didn't laugh when Fury read that. So, an alien that looks like a human with dark hair and blue eyes, is strong, and has laser eyes stole the ship? Natasha asked. And before that, he was working for Arctic Cargo with fake documents. Well, it's a lead. Though I probably should speak to Dr. Foster and Miss Lewis. They might know more. Fury nodded and suddenly looked very serious. We need to find this man, Romanoff. We have an alien with unknown strength and motivations who is in possession of an alien ship on our planet. If we don't deal with this swiftly, it could turn into another incident. Natasha got up. I can't believe they are calling it the incident, she said, looking at Fury. I was there. I remember it being a little more than a simple incident. He looked at Fury, and I have no intention of letting something like that happen again. Saying this, Natasha Romanoff turned and left the room. She was already missing the accountant. Orndalling thought she. Chapter 3. Moving forward. Clark was wrong. It had not been a good day. He had been all over town, sometimes making liberal use of his speed to beat the traffic, visiting every single newspaper he could find. He began with a very selective list, trying his luck with newspapers he had dreamed of working at. Sooner rather than later, he realized that maybe he would be more successful if he aimed a little lower. Just thinking about it made his head hurt. The Daily Bugle building. Earlier that day. "Who are you again?" asked John Jonah Jameson, barely looking at him while he shuffled through the papers on his table, a lit cigar in his mouth. "Clark K. I don't care who you are," he yelled, finally looking at him. That was a rhetorical question. "I don't know who you are, kid, and you have the gall to come here and waste my time by asking for money? Do you think this is one of those charity things where we feed the poor and homeless? Look, Mr. Jameson, No, you look," he pointed at him with his cigar. "We have no place for a reporter. What I need is a photographer. Can you do that?" "I can take pictures, yes," Clark answered slowly. By that point, he had already realized that whatever he could get here was a profit. "Then you are worth something." "Hallelujah. Let me clue you in a little secret, kid. I'm surrounded by idiots." Given he was yelling that, Clark didn't think it was such a closely guarded secret that he felt that way. "People think these so-called heroes out there are protecting them," he continued. "They think that these Avengers give a crap about what's happening in the city. Well, I'm here to clarify to you that they don't. This whole shitstorm with the aliens and that maniac with the horns was their fault. They made all this theater happen. And do you know why? Clark didn't, but he was sure Jameson would tell him. For fame, he howled, just so they could be hailed as heroes. And then, when every one of those poor bastards turns into a starstruck fan, that's when they act. Act how? He couldn't resist asking. They take power, Jameson yelled. They make themselves a symbol of everything that is right in the world, so that when someone disagrees, they are automatically wrong. They are a menace. He slapped the table with both hands, his eyes shining with a maniac glow. But I've seen through their ruse, and I will unmask them. Clark couldn't really speak right now, stunned into silence. I want pictures of the Avengers. That's what you can do, boy. Bring pictures of them showing their real colors and I will pay you. The word pay, for his eternal shame, shocked him into motion. How much? He asked before he could stop himself. $50. 25 if they are not perfect. Now leave. Not all of us are unemployed. That had been a one-of-a-kind experience and would remain just the one if he had anything to say about that. He couldn't imagine the kind of selfless, patient and humble soul that would take for someone to endure that man on a daily basis. He grabbed his burger from the plate and took a bite. At least the food was good. The place he was at wasn't bad at all. A little bar, good music, a few people drinking and laughing at the tables, not a bad place at all to end the day and go home, because even if his body wasn't feeling it, his mind was tired from the long and unsuccessful day. Well, maybe not all that unsuccessful. The New York Bulletin building, earlier that day. "Look, Clark, we just can't hire anybody right now," said Mitchell Ellison, editor-in-chief at the New York Bulletin. "It's really not a matter of want, but a matter of can't. I've read the articles you gave me, and they are good. You have talent. But we are being forced to work with less and less people every day just to make ends meet." He took his glasses off and sighed. "The truth is, we are hanging on by our fingertips. Newspapers are dying. Everybody wants news immediately. They want to take their cell phones and read. And they want their news updated as fast as they happen. Nobody wants to buy a printed newspaper every morning, just so half of what they read isn't relevant anymore by the end of the day. We are just at the end of our days." Clark could feel that the man really meant what he was saying. It wasn't just some excuse to turn him down. "I understand, sir, about you not being able to hire me, Clark said, getting up. "But I disagree with you. What you do, what I want to do, is as relevant as ever, maybe more than it ever was. Everybody wants fast news, that's true. And there are thousands of media vehicles ready to deliver them. But put those news to a test, and if you find that 1% of that is true, then you got lucky. What you do is bring true, real, and proof-based news every day, and that is as important as it ever was." He pushed the chair back to its place and smiled. "It's a shame you don't have a place for me now, but I hope you will one day." "It's been a pleasure, Mr. Ellison." He shook Ellison's hand and turned. He heard Ellison sigh again. "Clark, hold on." Clark looked at him again. "We can't hire you now, but I can buy stories from a freelancer." He pointed at Clark. "Bring me something worth reading, with all the proof to back it up, and I'll buy it from you." He shrugged. "It's not a perfect solution," Ellison added, "but it's what I can do right now. The number I gave you, do you have it? If you find something of value, give me a call, day or night. I don't really sleep much anyway." It really was a pity that Mr. Ellison couldn't hire him, Clark thought, biting his burger again. From every person he met that day, he felt that Mr. Ellison was the one who believed in what his career represented the most. He had a little problem with his belief. That was true, but deep down Clark felt he knew what was important. He was so distracted thinking about everything that happened that he only noticed someone was close when an enormous shadow came over him. "Can I see some ID?" asked a deep voice. Clark raised his eyes to see a huge man behind the balcony, and in a rare moment, he actually felt small, tall, bald, dark-skinned, and built like a bull. The man talking to him was even bigger than he was, with muscles so massive that Clark wondered the amount of food and exercise it would take to get to that point. "Sure, just a second," he finally said, digging through his pockets and fishing his ID. "Here." The man looked at it for a moment and gave it back, before opening a bottle of beer and putting it beside his plate. "I didn't," Clark began, only to be interrupted. "It's on the house." "It looks like you need it," he said, raising his hand. "I'm Luke. I own the bar." Clark quickly cleaned his hands on the napkin and shook the man's hand. "Clark, and thanks, it's very nice of you." It wouldn't work, of course, since he was immune to alcohol, but it was the thought that counted. "So, what's eating you?" Luke asked, wiping a few cups. "Girl problems?" He chuckled. "Need a girl for that." Luke smiled. "No, my problem is more basic. I moved here today and I can't find a job. Nobody is hiring in this economy, apparently." Luke nodded sagely. "It's not easy for anybody. Where are you from?" "Smallville." His eyebrows rose a little bit. "That a real town? Or you actually are from a Smallville?" "It's real," Clark answered. He waited a bit and added, "And pretty much yes." Luke snorted. "How are you adapting?" "Well, the apartment I'm renting is pretty much a dump. One of my neighbors is a drug addicted and I'm almost certain the other one is crazy. I don't have a job and my money won't last to the end of the month. Clark took a swig of the beer, but other than that, I like the city. I honestly didn't think I would like it that much. It's alive, you know what I mean? I do, Luke agreed. It's like the city has life of its own and the people in it are just a part of it. Yeah, Clark finished his burger and drank another sip. I just hope I don't have to leave it so soon. What do you do anyway? Luke asked. Journalist. Or at least I want to be one. No one is hiring though. I think I'm going to have to work by myself, at least for a while. Freelance. One of the editors said he would buy a story from me. Do you have a story? Nope. And to be honest, I don't even know where to start looking for a good one. I mean, should I go for politics, or something more down to earth, like the reconstruction of Hell's Kitchen, or just wait for Tony Stark to make a bombastic revelation to the press again? Luke laughed in his deep voice and then looked at Clark. Pop used to say the only direction in life that matters is forward. You already know what you have to do. Now you just have to do it. Clark considered what he said. That's a pretty simple way to look at things. Smart, too. That's Pop for you, Luke chuckled. Sometimes you just have to let another set of eyes look at the problem. He finished the beer and picked his wallet to pay for his dinner. Thank you for the talk and the beer. Next time I come back, introduce me to Pop. He sounds like someone I would like to meet. Luke smiled. If I can drag him here someday, I will. Good night. With that, he said his goodbyes and left the bar. The streets were much quieter now than they had been during the day, since there was no one around. The wind was chilly, but that didn't bother him, of course. Not when he could withstand Arctic winds without feeling cold. Luke's words were still in his mind, and he realized now that the guy was right. He knew what he had to do. Now it was just a matter of finding out how to do it. He was basically halfway there. Distracted by his thoughts, Clark was a bit surprised when a white van passed on his side, running a lot more than it should. He stopped and looked at the van until it reached the end of the street. That's when it drove on the sidewalk, right in front of a homeless man, and two masked men got out from the back and hit him in the head. Boy, did they have bad timing. It was an easy job. Get out of the van, beat some poor drunk or high bastard, throw him into the van and drive away. No fuss, no muss, just a quick grab and sell kind of deal. Of course, plans don't always go as advertised. This was one of those times. Before anyone realized what was happening, a dry thud sounded and one man fell. Nobody saw anything. Nobody had any kind of signal as to what was going on. One of the masked men simply jerked his head to the side, as if something had hit him, and fell down. Everyone stopped for a second, their brains trying to process what had happened. At that moment, a blur struck the second masked man, knocking him onto his back and away from the homeless person he was still trying to drag. To his credit, even as scared as he was, the man had the good sense to pull his gun and point it in the direction he had seen the moving shape. The act of taking his hand to his waist and grabbing the gun took about 2 seconds, but when he pointed it, there was nothing there anymore. Instead, he felt something holding him from behind, and before he could even think, he was pulled and thrown at the side of the van. The impact was so strong that the van shook, staying on 2 wheels for a while before falling back down. The masked man didn't see anything anymore. The third man, the driver, saw all that happened from the inside of the car. He didn't really understand it, the adrenaline making all the details hazy, but that small part of his brain that had survived years of evolution was screaming one thing at him: run. Without caring that his partners were unconscious on the street, the man turned the van and pressed the gas pedal as if his life depended on it. It wasn't exactly a fast car, and it took a little time to gain speed. All the while, the driver kept watching the thing that was attacking them in the mirror. It wasn't following until it simply vanished and appeared right in front of the van. He didn't have the time or the ability to react. The van simply crashed against his pursuer. But instead of running over it, instead of throwing it to the side, the vehicle behaved as if it had hit a steel wall. The noise of metal bending against an immovable object thundered across the night. It wasn't that bad of a crash. For all his despair, the van simply hadn't managed to gather that much speed. but it was enough to make him hit the wheel with his head and make him dizzy, probably break some ribs too. Groaning, he lifted his eyes to look through the cracked windshield. The thing was there, completely unscratched, appearing to not have moved a single inch. And then he wasn't there anymore, and he felt a hand grab him from behind. Before he could even scream, the thing lifted him with incredible force. He clashed against the ceiling, face first, and had to close his eyes when he was dragged against it, the metal burning against his forehead. When he was in the middle of the van, it stopped. He remained there, in the air, facing the ceiling, while the creature held him with apparently no effort at all. The pressure was beginning to push the air from his lungs. "Who are you?" the thing asked, his voice sounding disturbingly normal. "Shit, shit, shit," he chanted, panicking. The pressure became stronger, and he had to turn his face to the side so his nose wouldn't break. "If I have to ask again, I will begin to push," the thing said. "Then we will see what breaks first, the metal ceiling or you." Turk Barrett," he yelled, before the thing decided to crush him again. "Why were you kidnapping that man?" the thing asked. He didn't answer for a while, having literally forgotten about that. "For cash. They pay us to bring people to them. It doesn't matter who, you just pick them up and take them there. Junkies, drunks, homeless people no one will miss. Who pays you?" "Man, if I tell you they'll kill me." "I'd worry more about the present," the thing said, putting even more pressure on his back. "I don't know who they are, I swear. Don't ask, don't tell, right? But I can tell you where they are." "Where? If I tell you, will you let me go?" he asked. The excruciating pressure on his back was enough answer. "My pocket. The address is in my pocket." He felt a hand take something from his pocket, and then the thing let him go. He fell heavily on the ground and, before he could even think about moving, the thing crouched over him. Its eyes were glowing red. "Now listen to me and listen carefully," it said, the heat from its eyes making him sweat. "You are going to pick up your friends and drive to the nearest police station, and then you are going to surrender your illegal weapons and confess every single crime you did." The thing approached even more. If you make one turn on a street that isn't the way to the police station, I will catch up, fold this van like a can of tuna and throw it all the way to the station, and I don't really care how badly the landing will be. You saw how fast I am. You saw how strong I am. Don't test me." Looking at those red eyes, the last thing on his mind was disobey. "I swear to God I'll go to the police. Just let me go, please." He didn't even notice when the thing left. He just felt, a few seconds later, the unconscious bodies of his friends crashing against the inside of the van and the doors closing. He never willingly drove so fast to the police in his entire life. If there was one thing Clark didn't like, was people like those men who would so willingly destroy someone's life just for their own gain, no matter how small. It was disgusting, and it made him question whether those people were simply rotten to the core, or whether they had once been good and, for some reason, had become like that over time. He didn't know. He sighed and looked at the piece of paper he had taken from the man, all the while hearing the sound of the van, to make sure it would really go to the police. He had made a promise to Mr. Turk Barrett, after all. So maybe he wouldn't really toss the van all the way to the police station, but he would definitely fold that thing around them and personally drop it at the police station. The paper had an address and a time written on it. It was the place where they would drop the kidnapped people, and from there they would probably change locations. So the only option he had if he wanted to save those people was to go to that place before they were sent somewhere else. Well, it looked like his night was far from over and that he had maybe found a good story for publication. Who would have thought? Some nights Jessica Jones had trouble sleeping, or, to say it more accurately, some nights Jessica Jones didn't have trouble sleeping. Peaceful dreaming was an ancient memory by this point, and the mere act of closing her eyes brought forth things she rather not think about. The booze helped. It dulled reality for a while and made it bearable, but it was just a short-term solution. And since she had a fast metabolism and a higher rate of healing, it was an even shorter-term solution for her. So when sleep refused to come, Jessica worked. She followed cheating spouses across town, taking pictures as proof, trying to at least for a moment make herself believe that some people were just as messed up as she was. On the nights she didn't have work, though, Jessica always ended up in one place, the fire escape right in front of Luke's bar. What began as a way to keep tabs on a man whose wife she was forced to murder had quickly evolved into something else. Jessica didn't really have a word for it. The fact was, she realized, that somehow calmed her. Seeing his routine, serving drinks, talking with his clients, occasionally taking a woman to his apartment on the second floor of the bar, she wasn't thrilled about what she was doing. She knew she was invading his privacy. The people she followed for her clients she could justify to herself, since she was hired and they were obviously doing nothing good. But Luke was just living his life, following everyday routine, moving on. He was just a good man. Maybe that was the reason she liked to watch him so much. That night was pretty much like all the others she had watched him, at least in the beginning. Luke opened the bar. The clients arrived. He served the drinks and food, nothing out of the ordinary. Until one person entered the bar, a person she knew but had never saw there. It took her a moment to realize she was looking at her new neighbor, the guy who had arrived that very day, together with the real estate agent. It was a small surprise, but the guy needed a place to eat, she supposed. Nothing wrong with that. She saw him order a burger and sit there, quietly, for a while, apparently thinking very hard about something. Luke brought him a beer, they talked a bit, and he left. All very normal. What wasn't normal was the van driving fast on the empty street, just as he got out. What also wasn't normal were the men that got out of the van and tried to kidnap some guy, and what was even less normal was the sight of her neighbor running so fast he basically disappeared on a blur, the sight of him knocking down the kidnappers, and the sight of him stopping a moving vehicle just by standing in front of it. For a moment there, Jessica thought she had drunk a bit too much. She didn't even notice her jaw dropping or the fact that her flask was upside down, the cheap liquor falling. It was only when she unconsciously let the flask drop that the sound snapped her back into action. That was unbelievable, but it was real. She knew she wasn't drunk enough to imagine that. Her neighbor was apparently like her, except a little bit stronger and a little bit tougher. She forced herself to admit, for one embarrassing moment, that Jessica made sure to suppress quickly and hard. She felt a pang of fear. The last time she saw someone like her, someone gifted, well, saying that things hadn't really ended up well was like saying water was wet. But this guy was different, she thought. Or at least he seemed to be. He didn't have to help that dude, and yet he did, just like she would have done it once upon a time. Her curiosity was piqued. It was time to go back, just not to her apartment. As a good private investigator, Jessica would take this chance to learn a little more, just in case her neighbor ended up being less like her and more like him. And if she was being nosy, well, it wasn't like staying there taking pictures of Luke would change that. Natasha arrived in New Mexico later than she would have liked. It took her more than calculated to put her pressing matters in order so she could finally go. She couldn't even talk to Clint before embarking. She hoped he wouldn't pout when he got her message, but knowing him, he probably would. Darcy Lewis was the one who answered the door and let her into the lab, wearing robes and slippers, a mess of a hair, enough evidence that she was just out of bed. That and the irritated and tired look behind the glasses. Really? Couldn't you wait until tomorrow? Darcy asked. I'm sorry, Natasha apologized. I really am, but I'm sure you understand the need for me to move as quickly as I can. But why now? We already told you guys everything that happened. It's been months. They walked through the dark lab while talking, Natasha stepping with grace and speed, while following a sluggish Darcy, who apparently was having trouble with talking and moving at the same time. Shield has been looking for the ship all this time, she explained. They considered following the man a waste of resources, given that he and the ship were probably together. It was a bad move. So now they got you in the case, Darcy stated. Well, I don't know what else you want to hear, but sure, I guess we can tell it again. Saying that, Darcy turned to the wall and turned on the lights. The form of Jane Foster appeared, sleeping on a chair, her head held by the whiteboard full of equations in front of her. Natasha raised an eyebrow. Yeah, she's been doing that a lot, Darcy chirped. Usually she has a half-eaten sandwich on her lap, but I guess today she wanted to look pretty for the guests. And then she clapped, really loud. Jane jerked awake, hitting her head on the board. Jane, dear, Miss Widow is here. What? Jane slurred, looking around. Natasha took pity on her and walked closer, pulling up a chair. Dr. Foster, I called today, remember? She said, sitting down. I wanted to ask a few questions about the alien ship. Jane rubbed her eyes and nodded. I remember, sorry. I must have fallen asleep. Sleeping 10 minutes here and 15 minutes there isn't sleeping, Jane, Darcy protested, also sitting down. You have to stop moping around. Things are getting unsanitary already. There was a rat on your shoulders yesterday. I managed to toss him out with a broom, but it's only a matter of time until another one appears. A rat? That was Jerry, Jane exclaimed, suddenly awake. He was a lab rat. My lab rat. Wow. Well, my bad, Darcy stuttered in apology, but I'm sure he will be back. Lab rats are smart, right? Like Brain from the cartoon, remember? Pink, not so much, but there's a 50-50 chance. She frowned, suddenly thinking about something. What the hell were you doing with a lab rat anyway? You are an astrophysicist. Jane blushed a little bit. I was feeling lonely, he helped. Natasha tapped her finger on the table. If she didn't interrupt, she noticed she wouldn't leave tonight. Girls, please, the sooner we end this, the sooner you can go back to sleeping. Both of them turned to Natasha, as if they had forgotten she was there. Yes, of course, Jane said, sitting straight. What would you like to know? Like I said on the phone, I read the report S.H.I.E.L.D. made after interviewing you, but since I'm actually trying to find this person now, I would like to make my own questions. So if you could tell me what happened in detail, it might help. Dr. Foster nodded as she collected her thoughts. 3.5 months ago, I was contacted by the American Army for a consultation about an object that they had found. Understandably, they couldn't tell me more over the phone, so they sent someone here to explain that the Canadians had found something under the ice on a place called Ellesmere Island. Something they suspected it was not of this planet. Funny how normal it became after the Battle of New York to admit that something could be alien. People were often mocked, at best, if they dared to suggest such a thing before. She nodded so Jane would continue. I tried to explain that this wasn't my field, that I wasn't an expert on anything alien, but no one is, concluded Natasha. Exactly. I at least talked to one, so I guess that makes me kind of an expert, Jane chuckled. Talked? Interrupted Darcy, smiling. Is this how you kids are calling it today? Talk? Dr. Foster blushed hard. Anyway, I talked to S.H.I.E.L.D. and they didn't mind if I took 1 month from my research to go to the expedition, so I agreed. The pay was good and I was curious as to what they had found. No, S.H.I.E.L.D. wouldn't mind at all, Natasha thought, since they wanted to know what that thing was too. We both got there a few days later, Jane continued, and they gave us some of the information they had about it. Apparently, the ice around the object was 20,000 years old, and it was emitting a signal, which was how they managed to find it in the first place. What kind of signal? I don't know, but whatever it was, it stopped after it took off, I asked. Jane answered. After that, we took our stuff to our tent and waited. We didn't really have anything to do there until they managed to take the object out of the ice. Which was completely boring, Darcy added. Thus why I suggested we take a look around. After those annoying soldiers were out of the way anyway. Jane nodded, guiltily. So when night fell, we got out to take a closer look. You can't imagine how cold it was. If we died there, they wouldn't find our bodies until spring, probably. It was a stupid idea, so we decided to go back. That was when we saw one of the guys who worked for Arctic Cargo. The same one who had taken our things out of the plane. How can you be so sure it was the same guy? Inquired Natasha. Trust me, answered Darcy. There was no forgetting a guy that hot. Even Jane agrees with me. Given how much she was blushing, that was probably true. It doesn't matter how hot he was or wasn't. The problem is that he was wearing a t-shirt. No coat, no gloves, just a t-shirt. And in that weather, his fingers would have fallen off the minute he got out of his tent. Now that was interesting. We got curious, so we followed him, Ellesmere Island, 3.5 months ago. Jane and Darcy tried to follow the man as quietly and quickly as they could, which proved to be harder than they thought on that snow, and using that amount of clothes. On the upside, the howling wind made it difficult to hear, so the guy probably wouldn't listen to them. He was clearly going down to the wall of ice where the ship was trapped, so when they lost sight of him, that's where they headed to. It wasn't easy, holding to the frozen rocks, trying not to fall to their deaths in the raging sea, but they managed. The surprising thing was, the 20,000-year-old wall of ice wasn't as impenetrable as they thought. There was a tunnel on it. Both of them stopped to look at it, going as far as forgetting the cold and the height for a minute. Jane was stunned. There was simply no way that the army had dug that tunnel in such a short amount of time, without some serious equipment to do it, and on the side of a very high cliff. "What the hell?" exclaimed Darcy, conveying exactly what Jane was thinking. She touched the walls of the tunnel. It looks like it was melted. It did, but by what? A laser? What kind of laser could melt a wall of ice that thick? And with that kind of precision? And without making a sound? Jane's scientist mind was working overtime trying to make sense of this. Darcy, much more practical, simply walked towards the tunnel. She felt like she was in the depths of the sea walking under all that ice. There was no wind there and the sound was muffled. The light of the flashlights glowed against the walls. It was like another world entirely. And that's when they saw it. The mystery object, an alien ship, in all its glory. Even Darcy stopped moving for a second, while they tried to take in the view. The ship was huge, encrusted into the ice, like it was a sculpted mountain of metal. Beautiful and, at the same time, clearly not from Earth. In silence they walked towards it, eyes wide, until they found an entrance. The inside of the ship was maybe even more impressive. Surrounded by the alien metal, both of them followed the corridors, the weak lights doing little to stop them from looking around, trying to make sense of that weird environment. Until they crossed an open door and saw an odd floating robot. The robot didn't move when they approached, just kept itself in air. They looked at each other, smiling, amazed by what they were seeing. Darcy fumbled with her thick clothes and managed to pick her cell phone, pointing at the funny-looking robot. "Say cheese," Darcy said, grinning. Jane's own smile began to disappear when the robot seemed to open and started vibrating like an angry wasp. "Darcy, no," she yelled, pushing her friend to the side. Just at the moment, the robot lashed a strange metal tentacle at her. It missed Darcy but hit Jane in the stomach, throwing her in the air until she shocked against the wall. It hurt so much that she could barely breathe, but adrenaline was running through her veins as she tried to get away. Darcy ran to her, putting herself between her and the robot, that ridiculous taser on her hand. And then he was there. The man they were following, the man who supposedly worked for Arctic Cargo, and even in pain as she was, panicked as she was, she couldn't keep herself from watching as he grabbed the robot, fighting against it as it struggled, his fingers sinking into the metal, and then he pulled it. She could only hear as the metal was torn apart, the sound echoing on the narrow corridors. And then, when the robot still tried to move, the man picked it and crushed it, folding the metal as if it was paper. He gave the robot a last look, probably assessing if it was still a threat, and then looked at them. "Don't even think about it, pal," Darcy warned him, shaking her taser, as if she could actually do anything. The man simply raised his hands, a universal sign that he didn't want to fight, and started walking to them. "It's all right," he said, his voice calm, as if he was trying to tame a horse. "It's all right, I'm not going to hurt you." Jane was trying to keep herself from passing out, and Darcy was shaking like a leaf, but neither of them did anything. He approached, hands still held up, and crouched over Jane, ignoring the taser right in front of him. He moved slowly, making sure he didn't startle them, and opened Jane's coat. He sighed and looked at her. "You are hemorrhaging internally," he said, giving her one look. "Now, if I don't cauterize this bleed, how can—" "I can do things that other people can't," he answered and offered her his hand. "Now hold my hand, this is gonna hurt." He looked down and his eyes glowed red. Jane was still screaming when she passed out. Natasha was silent as she digested the story they told her, trying to look past all the amazing things and analyze the details. He looked at Jane. "May I?" he asked. Jane nodded, understanding, and lifted her shirt. There it was, the burned mark of the cauterized wound, proof of the story they just told her. "He saved my life," said Jane, letting the shirt fall down. "But damn if that didn't hurt. Scared the crap out of me," added Darcy, sounding serious for once. "I really thought we were done for." Jane just held Darcy's hand for a second, as if reassuring her. "So what happened then?" asked Natasha, looking at Darcy. "Well, it didn't take him long to finish up cauterizing the wound," she answered. "And then he just looked at me, told me she was going to be fine, and picked me and Jane up before I could even say anything. And then he ran. Now, when I say he ran, I mean he ran. All I saw was a blur, and suddenly we were back to our tent and he was gone. It wasn't long until the tremor started and the ship flew off." Natasha stayed in silence once again, contemplating everything she had learned, trying to form a clear picture of the man she was chasing. So far, all she had were physical attributes: appearance, strength, speed, the ability to shoot energy from his eyes. But now, perhaps, she had just learned something new. She had learned that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't a bad guy at all. He had no reason to save their lives. If he was an alien, which was pretty much confirmed, and stealing an alien ship from under the nose of two armies, why would he risk himself by leaving witnesses? Why would he save both women that had seen his face, that could give the army clues as to who he was? If he just left them there, Natasha doubted she would have enough clues to even start this investigation. But he did save them, and that told Natasha that he had a conscience. Maybe that was something she could use. Natasha got up from the chair. "Thank you for your help," she said. "I believe you gave me something to go on." With that, she said her goodbyes and turned to leave, but then she stopped again, as if remembering something, and looked at Jane. "Jane." The girl looked at her. "I may not have known Thor for a long time, but I fought by his side. Even then, when his own brother was attacking Earth, he managed to tell us a little bit about you. So I can tell with absolute certainty that if he isn't here by your side, it's because he can't be. He loves you. Never think otherwise." Now that her good deed of the year was done, Natasha left. She had an alien to find. Chapter 4. Van Trial by Fire. Clark looked down from the edge of the building on which he was perched. If he had one thing to say about that place, it was that it really looked like somewhere where people would be held against their will. 9 out of 10 kidnappers would approve. It was a dark and uninhabited neighborhood, full of abandoned warehouses, just a lot of empty streets and shadowy buildings. The address he took from the kidnapper, Turk Barrett, was of the building directly in front of the one on which he was standing. Like all the others around, it was probably used to store some kind of cargo. It had only 2 floors, big gates so trucks could go in, and a vast area where any kind of thing could be kept. From where he was standing, a normal person wouldn't be able to see a thing inside the warehouse. Clark, however, wasn't exactly a normal person. Concentrating his senses, he allowed his vision to focus until his eyes were able to not only see all the way from where he was with absolute clarity, but to also pass through the brick walls and see inside of the warehouse. He was right about the place. It was housing a lot of cargo. Big storage containers were piled all over, across the whole extension of the building. The second floor was reasonably empty, with a few tables and chairs only, but it was the most interesting place to look at, since it was where the people were. Clark counted 11 men, some standing guard, some sitting around the table playing cards, all armed with rifles and pistols. Except one, the only man who wasn't armed, was standing alone by the wall, wearing a lab coat, his face worried. He had black hair, Asian traces, and was probably in his late 40s. Whoever he was, though, he clearly wasn't one of the kidnapped people. For one simple reason, he wasn't chained. Aside from the armed men and the man wearing the lab coat, there were 5 people, all chained to each other, all with terrible appearances. It wasn't their ragged clothes or even the fact that they were filthy, it was the blank look on their faces, like they couldn't even realize what was happening around them. They were drugged out of their minds, and for all appearances, not for the first time. On the upside, they were still there. That was good. They hadn't been moved yet, and now that Clark was there, they wouldn't be, as far as he was concerned, and there weren't enough guns there to stop him from rescuing them. But not yet, because no matter how much he wanted to fly right into the warehouse's brick wall, beat down the armed men, and then rescue the kidnapped people, he couldn't. Not while he didn't know where the previously kidnapped people had been taken to. So right now he would stay there, quiet, and wait. Jessica Jones picked the lock of her neighbor's apartment with ease, her skills still very much honed, even if she usually preferred to just break the door down. It wouldn't be, however, very welcoming of her to destroy her neighbor's apartment on the day he moved in. The apartment, like all the others in the building, including hers, was a junkyard. Even worse than hers, since he clearly hadn't cleaned it or put any effort into decorating it. There was not even a TV. Even Malcolm, her other neighbor, the junkie who would constantly sell his own stuff to buy drugs, had a TV. Her attention shifted from the home appliances to the personal stuff, the stuff that would hold some meaning to him and, because of that, give her a clue as to who her new neighbor really was. He walked into his room looking around. There were no books anywhere. Maybe he would bring them later? His clothes were also pretty normal, simple, nothing fancier than a shirt. And there, under the clothes, bingo, a notebook. She picked it up and opened, turning it on. It was a cheap computer, probably several years behind the top-of-the-line models. But she wasn't interested in how good it was, but what was in it. She got a pen drive from her pocket, loaded with a simple program to bypass passwords, and inserted it. Computers nowadays were a private investigator's holy grail of information. Gain access to one and you had everything about a person in your fingertips. What kind of likes and dislikes the person had, what kind of hobbies that person enjoyed, what kind of people that person had contact with. It was more of a matter of knowing to interpret all that information than to actually have to dig in to find more. And Jessica was unnaturally good at doing that. Her neighbor, for example, was named Clark Joseph Kent, 21 years old, the adopted and only son of Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent, originally from... No, that can't be a real name. It wasn't possible. One quick search proved her wrong. Smallville? Jessica exclaimed. Who in their mind would name a place like this? Well, that wasn't important now. So moving on, Clark was probably trying to become a journalist. He had an incredible number of articles written and had visited pretty much every single journalism site on the internet. He was also apparently capable of speaking many different languages, or at least he had articles in several languages downloaded on his computer. No college, though, just an obscene number of journalism courses. He enjoyed movies, the classic old ones, but also the kind that nerds usually watch, with a lot of sci-fi. On YouTube his tastes were diverse, but he liked to watch culinary shows quite a bit. Maybe trying to learn how to cook, perhaps, or he just liked to watch food being made. It was the next best thing to do when you didn't have the cash or the means to acquire good food. His social media accounts practically existed so he could follow news, she noticed. He followed every single news vehicle, blog, reporter, and freelance journalist of every country she could name. Well, that was one way to keep up with what happens in the world, she supposed. The lack of books in the apartment was explained when she found digital copies on the computer, an absurd number of digital books on every conceivable subject. He had the normal ones, such as Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings, but also books about quantum physics, advanced mathematics, medicine, literature, economics, history. The guy had a freaking library in his notebook, and he had, by the looks of it, at least browsed all those documents. He was either a hoarder or a very smart man with super fast reading capabilities and insomnia. He had no girlfriend and very few friends by the look of it. And while there were no pictures on his computer, the desktop background featured an image of 3 people hugging under a tree, 2 adults and a child. If she had to guess, those were his parents and him. Sighing, Jessica closed the notebook. There really wasn't anything here that could give her absolute certainty about this guy's character. Then again, she wasn't expecting such a thing. Hoping, yes, but not expecting. She had 2 choices now. She could put everything back, get out, lock the door again and follow the guy until she had a general notion of what he was like, or she could sit down and wait for him to come back so she could have a chat with him, face to face. Well, in the end, it was a stupid dilemma. Fis I've tave lu to dilemma. Jessica could be subtle when she wanted, but being as direct as a cannonball was more her style. Clark didn't have to wait long. Less than 30 minutes later, 3 black cars approached the warehouse and the gate opened so they could get inside. 12 people got out of the cars, but only 2 of them, a man and a woman, went to the second floor. The other 10 remained close to the cars, rifles prepared, waiting for their return. It was obvious that those 2 were in command, because the moment they stepped on the second floor, everyone stood up and turned to look at them. The man in charge barely acknowledged them, turning his eyes to the kidnapped people instead. His cold face was impassive. "What exactly is this?" he asked, a heavy British accent clear to Clark's enhanced hearing, gesturing to the drugged people. "I've asked for subjects, living subjects. I don't believe those qualify, do they?" Clark had to expect this from a man who kidnapped people for a living, but the way he talked about them, as if they were less than things, made his blood boil. The Asian man wearing the lab coat approached frantically. "I warned them. I told them that these people wouldn't be able to help. They can't possibly survive the experiment in that state." Experiment, Clark thought, realizing that there was more going on than he imagined. The British man turned to the doctor. "Did you, Dr. Okamura?" he questioned, raising his eyebrows. He looked at another man, one of the armed ones. "Did he?" The man looked scared but nodded. "I tried to get better subjects, boss, but the Russians control the human traffic in this town," he answered, trying to explain himself. "You said you didn't want to call any attention to what we were doing, so I tried to fly under the radar, to take people no one would miss." The boss looked at the doctor. "Are you sure they can't survive?" He hesitated but answered, "The serum is not stabilized. The shock of the serum plus the therapy to raise their adrenaline. If the serum were ready, we could inject it even on someone with a terminal disease. But now, in the condition they are, they will never make it. Why isn't it stabilized yet?" "I don't have the equipment to do it," Okamura said, fear clear in his face. "And what exactly do you need, doctor?" "I have a contact at Oscorp that can get everything I need by tomorrow." "Make the arrangements then. You are responsible for that," the boss said, turning to the armed man again. "As for you, I ordered you to bring me subjects and to do it quietly. You only did one of those things, Angel." The woman by his side approached silently, a match held on her lips, and, without saying anything, her hand darted and she grabbed the armed man by the throat, lifting him from the ground as if he didn't weigh anything. Clark could only look as she snapped her hand shut, the sound of bones breaking shocking him to his core. "Who is the second in command?" the British man asked, completely calm. One of the other men approached slowly, the fear clear on his face. "You are responsible for the next batch of subjects. Find them and bring them quietly. Understand? I gave you 2 orders. I want them both fulfilled." Angel tossed the dead man on the ground. "Doctor, you have until tomorrow night to get the equipment and start the work to stabilize the serum. Fail me and I will find another." He started walking to the stairs, Angel by his side. "As for these junkies, unchain them and burn the place down. Just a bunch of addicts breaking and entering to have a little fun. It's not like we own the place." When they were gone down the stairs, it was like the spell was broken, and everybody began to move with purpose. The doctor left in a hurry, while the armed men started to pour gasoline in the room. Clark watched as the man who appeared to be the boss got into the car and left the warehouse, just as the men upstairs tossed a match and the flames started. He had a choice to make now. He could chase the man who appeared to be in charge, hoping he would eventually lead him to the place where they were conducting experiments on people, except that there was no guarantee he would go there, or that he would talk under duress, or that he was even in charge at all of this operation. He could also chase the doctor and try to intimidate him into talking, but again he had no guarantee he would talk, or that he even knew where those people were being held, since he apparently was just a pawn. Or he could save those people from burning to death, find Dr. Okamura tomorrow, and then follow him and the equipment he would acquire to the main base. There was really just one choice here, As far as Clark was concerned, when the cars began leaving the warehouse, Clark jumped, reaching more than enough height to cross the street and get to roof of the burning building. But instead of a controlled landing, Clark made sure to fall down with force, breaking the roof and getting to the second floor in one go. The flames were already going strong, fed by the gasoline and all the wood. He could feel the strong heat waves, the sound of the fire thundering in his ears. But the flames were not near hot enough to bother him as he passed through them to get to the kidnapped people. He didn't know if it was the heat or the effect of the drugs passing, but the people began to awake as the flames got closer. That was not good. Clark could take them all with no difficulty, but panicking people always made things harder. So before they made something stupid, like trying to run aimlessly, he dashed through the fire and got to them, losing no time as he picked two of them into his arms. Looking around, Clark's eyes spotted a big wooden table close to him. With one kick, he launched it across the room, directly at the windows on the other side of the flames. The glass offered no resistance as the table smashed through them, falling with a loud bang on the street. Losing no time, Clark jumped through the broken window. He landed on the street, the two men still on his arms, and ran to the other side, putting them on the ground at a safe distance. Then he flew back into the warehouse in a split of a second, doing the same thing with two others. When he came back for the last one, however, things changed. Part of the roof collapsed, falling right in front of the windows. It was no obstacle to him because he could simply pass through with speed and brute force. But the kidnapped woman in his arms would most likely get hurt. He stopped for a second, assessing the situation, when he noticed the terrified look of the woman. "Oh God, save me from hell. Please, please, please. I swear this is the last time I'm going to use it." He began to speak, her nails scratching his arms with enough force to break skin if he was human. Well, if he couldn't go forward, backwards, or down, Clark thought, he could always go up. Covering the woman with his body, he flew, crashing a hole through the ceiling, rising to the sky. He looked down, meeting the eyes of the amazed woman. "Are you an angel?" she whispered, true wonder on her eyes. Clark just smiled, floating down to the street. He needed to take these people to a hospital. It was almost time for the sun to rise when Clark got home. After he rescued the kidnapped people, he had to take them to a hospital to make sure they weren't hurt. Physically, they were fine, but they were still drug addicts, heroin users apparently. Clark sighed. He saved them from the kidnappers and the fire, but in the end, they would have to be the ones to save themselves. The woman, at least, seemed very certain when she signed her name to begin treatment on a free rehab program that one of the nurses recommended. Apparently, she saw a sign from God. Clark really hoped she could go through with it. He was tired. His kryptonian physiology allowed him to go sometimes days without sleeping. As long as he had a healthy dose of sunlight during the day, his body wouldn't get worn out. But that didn't mean his mind wouldn't. And with the day he had, all he wanted right now was to sleep for a few hours, until he could begin his search for Dr. Okamura. Clark was almost beside himself with relief when he turned the key and opened the door, until he saw there was a woman sitting inside his apartment. "Oh God, please no." "Welcome back," his neighbor greeted, putting her cell phone down. "I was beginning to think the big city had swallowed you up." Slowly, still wishing this was an unusual hallucination, he entered and closed the door, resting his head on it for a second before turning. "What is it with you people and boundaries?" Clark asked his neighbor. He frowned for a second before getting it. "Malcolm? Yeah, he does that sometimes when he is high. And what about you? Are you high too?" "Oh no, I strictly stick to drinking," she answered, taking a swing out of a flask to prove her point. Clark sighed. "Look, I had a long day and a long night, and I'm pretty sure this day won't be any shorter. So, as much as I want to meet my neighbors, I kinda want to sleep more. So please, Jessica Jones," he finished. "Please, Miss Jones, let me rest. We can talk tomorrow." She snorted. Clark was not amused. "Miss," Jessica chuckled, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe it. "You really are a Boy Scout, huh?" "Not really, just being polite. Unlike someone." Yeah, I'm never polite. The whole concept kinda pisses me off, really. I'm seeing that. He opened the door and gestured to it. Ma would be very disappointed in me, though, if I forgot my manners, no matter how much I want to. She seems like a wise woman. So maybe I'll take a page out of her book and give this manners thing a try. She walked to him, pushing the door close again, never taking her eyes off him. How are you doing? Hard night. Must have been. You smell like a bonfire. Clark looked at her seriously for the first time. Passed close to a building on fire, he told her. Nothing too bad, I hope. No one got hurt, I'm sure. That's a relief. I mean, it could be worse, right? Like I saw a guy being run over tonight. Right here, close to Luke's bar. Her voice was laced with an obvious fake surprise, like she was just playing a role, and then she got serious and eyed him without blinking. From where I was standing, though, it seemed more like the guy ran over the car. Clark felt his blood turning to ice. She had seen him using his abilities. His face didn't move an inch, but his heart was beating faster than ever. For the first time since his childhood, someone had seen him doing something he shouldn't be able to, and recognized him. He didn't know what to do. Really? He inquired, trying to gain time until he could make his brain function again. That sounds like quite the story. Jessica Jones was still looking at him, still unblinking. It was quite amazing. The guy saved some dude from being kidnapped, beat the shit out of the bad guys, stopped a moving vehicle with his own body. I was actually waiting to see if he would turn green. He didn't know what to say, and the woman just wouldn't blink. She just kept looking at him with those big eyes of hers, and if he were human, he knew he would be sweating. That sounds very unlikely, he mumbled. Are you sure you didn't see things wrong? In the dark, sometimes our vision— Oh, darn it, he exclaimed suddenly, almost making Clark jump back. It was you. I know it and you know it. Let's just move on with this shit. Clark was actually paralyzed. His body wouldn't respond, and his mind was yelling just one thing. Deny, deny, deny. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, and he knew he sounded so fake that even the most naive person in the world wouldn't fall for that. Oh, you don't? She approached her mad face as much as she could without touching him. So you are going to look me in the eyes and tell me that you weren't that guy? I don't know what you're talking about, Clark repeated automatically, and he wanted to punch himself. Her eyes acquired a dangerous look, and then unexpectedly she seemed to deflate. Look, I got it, all right? You don't know me. I broke into your apartment, and now I'm confronting you about something you just don't go around telling people about. She eyed him carefully, making herself look non-threatening. But I swear that I'm not a danger to you, okay? You can admit it. Clark looked at her for a long minute, not moving, not reacting. Then he said, I don't know what you're talking. That's when she punched him. He saw her muscles contracting. He saw her fist moving. Any other day he could have easily dodged or defended himself, but not that day. That day he was so surprised by what was happening that he was stuck to the ground as if cement had been poured over him. And because of that, he was powerless to stop her when her hand collided with his chin. The result couldn't have been otherwise. Crack, damn it, he yelled, clutching her broken hand. You freaking broke my hand. If Clark was facing difficulties to think before, now he was reaching a whole other level of mental paralysis. You punched me, he stuttered, taking his own hand to his face as if he were hurt, an over-delayed response that wouldn't fool anybody. It's not my fault. It is your fault. You wouldn't admit it. Admit to what? He replied. You just don't know how to make a fist. Sometimes when you punch wrong, your fingers break. Without knowing what to do, he went to the fridge and opened it, looking for something cold so she could put on her hand. Oh, I know how to punch. I do it all the time. In fact, I just punched you with enough force to make your jaw cross the freaking street if you were just an ordinary guy. And with that, she followed him to the fridge, grabbing it with her left unbroken hand and lifting it from the ground. There was a moment of complete silence. Clark was speechless. Her arm was extended, her hand was barely holding the old and very heavy fridge, and yet she was lifting it with no effort at all, just like he could have done with his kryptonian strength. He turned his face to her, shock clear on his expression. That's when the last thing she said reached his brain. Wait a minute. Did you say my jaw would have been launched across the street? Jessica dropped the fridge without care. It would if you weren't able to stop a moving car with your chest. And what if you were wrong? You would have killed me. I knew I was right. I'm not blind. I saw you clearly from the fire escape in front of Luke's bar. What the hell were you doing there? Stalking me? I wasn't stalking I wasn't stalking you. I saw you by accident. That kind of shit tends to happen when you stop a frickin' car with your body in the middle of the street. Clark was breathing hard now, unable to keep up with the events of the night. How could something like that happen on his first day on New York? He tried to calm himself, and sometimes the best way to do that is to fall into routine. So he stopped worrying about himself for a second and focused on her, looking at Jessica's hand with his X-ray vision. Your hand is fractured. It's probably nothing serious, but let me... She pushed her hand back. Forget the hand, it will be fine by the afternoon, she said, and he wondered if rapid healing was also part of her abilities. Now can we start again? Jessica looked at him seriously. He met her eyes for a moment and nodded. Yeah, I guess we can. She seemed to calm down when he agreed to talk. So the guy I saw... It was me, Clark admitted, since that was no reason to lie now. She nodded and then slapped his shoulder with her good hand. What the hell were you thinking? She exclaimed. He was taken aback. I'm sorry? Using your powers in the middle of the street? Getting involved with criminal bullshit? What if someone saw you? You were lucky I was the only one there. He sighed and took his hands to the face. I wasn't thinking. The guy needed help. I helped. Wouldn't you? Jessica didn't even hesitate. No. Do you know why? Because I'm not an idiot. Really? If you were there in a position to help, you wouldn't have done anything? You would have turned your back and let them drag that guy? Yeah, I would. Clark met her eyes for a long while, assessing her. I don't believe you, he said, after a time, his voice heavy with certainty. She seemed affronted. And why is that? Clark pointed at her. You are here, aren't you? For someone who doesn't care about helping people, you sure as hell look worried about me. That's different, she answered after a few seconds of silence. How? It just is, okay, she exploded, suddenly looking furious. Look, you don't get it. You are young, you are powerful. I bet you think nothing can hurt you, right? I bet you feel freaking invincible helping those people. Well, you aren't. That's the thing. Nobody is. There is always someone or something worse out there. And if you look for it, you will find it. Or it will find you. Clark didn't back down. He just held his eyes on her, calm and thoughtful. Is that what happened to you? He said finally. By the reaction of her face, he had made a right assumption. Jessica closed her hand into a fist, true fury in her eyes. That is none of your business, she replied slowly, and then she breathed, controlling herself. You know what? I did my part. Listen to me. Don't listen to me. I don't care. It's your life. She turned and walked to the door. I can't stop, Clark declared. Those guys I beat, they were working for someone worse. They are kidnapping people on the streets for some kind of experiment. I don't know what they are doing or where they are doing it, but I am going to find out. I have to. Why? Why you? Why don't you give this to the police? And tell them what? That I stopped a moving vehicle with my own body. That I threatened the driver until he admitted he was working for some guy who is kidnapping people for experiments? Do you really think someone is going to listen to this? If they don't arrest me on the spot, which they probably would, they are simply going to close their eyes and pretend nothing is happening. There are people dying right now, alone, scared, in pain. If I can help, it is my responsibility to do so. Sighing, Jessica opened the door, looking at him for one last time. Well, do what you gotta do. I did my part. And with that, she walked out and closed the door. Jessica let her body rest against the closed door for a moment, closing her eyes, breathing deep. He didn't understand. He couldn't, just as she couldn't before it happened to her. If he kept doing this, putting himself in danger's way, some bad shit was going to happen to him sooner or later, just as it had happened to her. It was funny, she thought, how things had changed so fast. Minutes before he arrived, her only worry was to know if this guy was one of the good ones, or if he was the same as some of the lowlifes out there who abused their powers to their own gain, no matter who got hurt. Other than that, she really didn't give a damn as long as he wasn't a threat to her. But how exactly could she turn a blind eye to the fact that she was basically looking at her past self? She would have to be a tremendous hypocrite and an idiot not to realize that. She tried not to be the first, and she definitely wasn't the second. Was this fear talking? Absolutely. She knew that, even if she didn't like to admit it. The only time she tried to use her gifts to help people, her reward was a visit to hell itself. So there was the question. If she could go back in time and stop herself from trying to help people, would she? She didn't know. What she did know was that she couldn't let another person go through what she had, not if she could help. Sometimes Jessica felt worthless. She didn't want to feel like that anymore. Clark scratched his eyes, twice as tired as he was when he arrived. What a night he was having. He looked around and took his notebook. He wouldn't be able to sleep now, not after this. Better start working then. Dr. Okamura wouldn't just drop out of the sky. The moment he turned his computer on, though, his door opened with force. Jessica Jones looked at him, conflicted for a moment. Her expression changed, however, and suddenly her eyes were alive. "What do you have to go on?" she asked. Natasha was feeling slightly irritated, looking at her impassive face, her impeccable manners, and hearing her calm voice. Few people would notice it. But that didn't change the fact that she was feeling a little bit angry. The manager of Arctic Cargo wasn't being helpful, nor he was being completely polite. Natasha supposed it was her own fault. Every person had to be handled differently when it came to asking questions. Most men, and quite a few women, were partial to her charms. Being incredibly beautiful and trained in seduction made this a very useful skill on her field. Others responded better to gentleness instead of seduction, nice words, compliments, a smile. Owen Connor was neither of those. Oh, he was attracted to her. He knew that the second she entered the room. Not exactly difficult to notice when the man looked at her and ran his eyes from head to toe with barely concealed lust. Uncomfortable, maybe, but she was already more than used to it, and it was a weakness she thought she could use. A mistake. The man was attracted to her, yes, but he was also a misogynist, conceited and self-important individual. So because of that, no matter how much he lusted over her, using that particular tactic wasn't getting her anywhere, because at the same time he also didn't respect her enough to consider her an authority. She would have to rectify that. "Mr. Connor," she called again, trying to gain his attention, as he continued to boss around the people in the office as if she weren't there. "Liam," the man yelled, ignoring her, giving a document to young man who passed. "Take this to my secretary. I'm going to need copies. And remember her that I still want my coffee." He finally turned to her, barely looking at her face. "Look, Miss Romanoff, I'm a busy man. I can't just stop working now to answer a bunch of nonsense questions. Give me a call and I'll try to make some time, but now it's really not possible." Natasha raised an eyebrow. Without saying anything, she got up from her chair, walked to the door of his office, and closed it loudly. There was a sudden silence in the workplace. "Maybe I didn't make myself clear enough, Mr. Connor," Natasha said, looking at him with cold eyes. "You are being questioned about a theft made by one of your employees, a theft of alien technology." He walked back to his table, but didn't sit down. "If you refuse to answer those questions right now, I will arrest you as an accomplice. I will take you to an underground facility, and then I will ask the same questions again. Except I'm not going to be as nice anymore." She held her cold eyes without blinking, seeing his attitude suddenly changing. "I have rights." "You'll have rights when I say you can have them," Natasha interrupted. "I'm not with the police, Mr. Connor. I'm not a cop. I am a spy and an assassin who occasionally gets to work as an interrogator. Which role I'll play right now depends entirely on you. So, are you going to answer my questions or not?" Natasha could see a trickle of sweat running down his face as he nodded, the role model of cooperation now. "That's good," she said, as she sat down again. "Now about this employee of yours, James Bartholomew Olson. What can you tell me about him?" Mr. Connor breathed deeply, trying to calm himself. "Look, you got to understand that Arctic Cargo isn't that big of a company. I mean, we have our slice of work with explorers and scientists and this kind of thing, but this contract with the Canadian Army was big. I mean, big enough to pay our bills for the rest of the year. We couldn't lose it." Romanoff nodded, urging him to go on. "Now, it's not easy to get clearance to work with the Army, Lots of bureaucracy and a lot of time wasted. We have this clearance, but the size of the project demanded more people than we had, so you hired people without clearance and faked their documents, said Natasha. Mr. Connor nodded, looking afraid. I don't care what laws you broke. That's not why I'm here, Mr. Connor. This is between the Canadian Army and you. I'm here to ask questions about this specific employee that you hired. Okay, what do you want to know? Did you meet him personally? She asked. Yes, I was the one who hired those guys. Can't say I remember everything about them, but I definitely remember this one. This interested Natasha. Why is that? Well, the guy was working on Cassidy Pub. It's just a little restaurant on the side of the road. Lots of truckers stop by to eat and rest. I was there one day minding my business when a drunk trucker had the brilliant idea to grope a waitress. This guy did not approve. They fought. Well, fight is a strong word. The guy simply tossed the drunk out like he was a kitten, tossed him on the ground, grabbed him by the back of his coat and carried the guy all the way to his truck, left him there to cool off. Strong lad, seemed nice. So I offered him a job. I mean, if he could carry that guy like that, he sure as hell wouldn't have trouble with a few boxers. Do you know anything else about this man? I didn't ask anything else because, frankly, I didn't care. It was just a guy. Natasha didn't say anything for a moment, just thinking about the new information she had. A pattern was forming in her mind. A man who liked to help people. Yes, that was consistent with what Dr. Foster and Miss Lewis had told her, but there was something else now. The man that she was almost certain was an alien was working in a pub. She knew he worked for Arctic Cargo. That was why she was here after all. But this particular job could have been just a mean to get closer to the ship, but working in a restaurant wasn't. That indicated a level of knowledge about humanity that not even Thor had acquired yet. This alien was here, on Earth for a long time, and they never heard anything about him. The discovery changed things. Maybe he was less of an invader and more in the lines of illegal immigrant. That was something to think about. Funny thing though, not really related to the guy, but definitely related to the trucker he tossed out, Mr. Connor added, laughing, breaking Natasha's concentration. After that happened, the guy still tried to come back inside. Well, that's not true. He went back, but he didn't enter, too afraid, I guess. But he kept yelling some pretty nasty things from the outside. The thing is, after a while of this annoying little shit yelling non-stop, there was a huge wind and a big crashing sound. What happened? Natasha wondered. Karma, that's what, Mr. Connor cackled. Some huge pine trees somehow got caught by the wind and flew right through this guy's truck. The thing looked like a pincushion of trees. Natasha really doubted that the wind was responsible for that. Well, he probably was still a good guy, she thought. But everyone had their limits. He would do well to remember that. Wanevil Tortlum for remember that. Wanevil Tortlum for remember that. X marks the spot. So, what's your professional advice? We just stay here? Clark asked. Jessica rolled her eyes and went back to her surveillance. They were both on the top of a building, looking down on the movement of the people and the cars below, waiting for Dr. Okamura to finally get out from his clinic on the other side of the street. It's a stakeout, she answered. What were you expecting? Some Sherlock Holmes bullshit? Did you want me to break into his clinic, lick some old wine stain from his lab coat, and deduce by taste and smell alone that he is hiding the kidnapped people in a freaking wine cellar on Cordoba? Clark sighed and waited, because he knew by now that she wasn't done. If Sherlock Holmes was realistic, there would be a lot less witty battles against Moriarty and a lot more of him and Watson watching people boning in dark alleys. She put her binoculars down. But then I suppose the target audience would be completely different. Lots and lots of sarcasm aside, Clark was glad Jessica decided to help him. He managed to find Dr. Okamura's clinic in a couple of hours with only a surname and a sketch of his face that he did on the spot. He could be foul-mouthed and probably an alcoholic as well, but she was also an excellent private investigator. Dr. Okamura's full name was Daniel Okamura, and he was a geneticist of relatively renown. Among his published researches, the one that got the most attention was a study he did on mutants, or, more accurately, a study he did on non-mutants that carried the so-called X gene. Clark hadn't read the whole thing, but the study went on how it was common knowledge that mutants carried the X gene, which usually was activated during puberty, resulting in the mutations or powers that the mutants had. What wasn't common knowledge, or at least it wasn't advertised, was the fact that some non-mutants could also carry the X gene without activating it their whole lives. That's how the X gene was passed on, sometimes skipping generations, but always present in certain lineages. Dr. Okamura's thesis was a study on the possibility of the X genes being artificially activated, meaning turning a non-mutant that carried the X gene into a mutant without waiting for nature to do her thing further down the line. Apparently, his thesis had received some attention, but no one wanted to really invest in it. The world wanted fewer mutants, not more. And since it was difficult to find willing subjects that wanted to risk injury and death to become the very beings that the majority of the world despised, the study didn't progress at all, or at least it hadn't progressed legally. Clark had a good idea now of the kind of experiments these people were doing. "So, are you one of them?" asked Jessica, suddenly interrupting his thoughts. "You know mutants? Because it's cool if you are, I don't judge." He looked at her. No, he was an alien, but Clark didn't really want to share that now. People had a tendency of freaking out when they found out more now, he imagined, after an alien invasion. "No," he answered slowly. "I acquired my abilities after birth." It wasn't technically a lie. If he had remained on Krypton, under a red sun, he would have been a normal Kryptonian. Still an alien, yes, but one without his so-called powers. "What about you?" Clark asked, trying to shift the conversation from him and, to be honest, being legitimately curious about it. "Accident," he said and didn't elaborate. He turned the binoculars to the clinic's exit again. "It's funny, isn't it? The way they talk about it on TV, it's like mutants are going to destroy the world. They are freaking beasts of the apocalypse. Like they'll just, I don't know, teleport inside the White House and stab the president. And yet, I never even saw one before." Clark considered her words for a second. "Me neither. There aren't many, and they don't advertise what they are, for good reason, I guess. And forgive me for the cliché, but people fear what they don't understand." Jessica clicked her tongue as if he had said something obvious. "I know they do. And honestly, there are some mutant nutjobs who are genuinely terrifying, like that Magneto guy. But why the hell do governments all over the world lose their shit when they hear the word mutant? There are worse people out there, scarier people, who aren't mutants and yet don't care about them at all. They are an identifiable group," Clark theorized, having thought about this before. "Easy to tell apart, easy to isolate and to make people fear. It doesn't have the same ring to say people should fear Jessica Jones or Clark Kent as it does to say that people should fear mutants. And there is also the fact that they are unpredictable. You can't know which people are going to be born mutants, where they will appear, what will be their loyalties, what will be their abilities. I don't agree with it, obviously, but I can understand how governments may come to fear them, and how useful this fear is to some people." After a moment considering Clark's long and over-detailed explanation, Jessica just shrugged. "Yeah, well, people are idiots," she concluded wisely. They spent some minutes in silence, just observing, and then she looked at him again. "So, how strong are you really?" she asked, as if she'd been meaning to do this for a while. He looked at her wary. "Why? You want to hit me again?" he inquired, and she unconsciously touched her right hand. That was, to Clark's wonder, mostly healed by now. "No, I learnt my lesson. Just making conversation." Clark himself had wondered that many times. "I don't know," he finally said. "It's not like I go to the gym and keep notes on how much I can bench press." "But what was the heaviest thing you've lifted?" she questioned, opening her hip flask to take a swig. "I mean, I can lift a car. Can you?" "I lifted a tractor once," he said, then added, "when I was 3. Jessica choked in the middle of her swig. "What the? 3 years old?" "My father was fixing the tractor and I wanted to help. He looked uncomfortable under it. So I thought I could make it easier." "So you just went over there and lifted the entire thing over your head?" Well, not the entire thing, but yes, pretty much. Damn it, she said, shaking her head. But what about now? What was the heaviest thing you have ever lifted in your life? Clark thought for a second. An oil rig. This time, Jessica was shocked into silence for a while at least. Holy mother of, how the hell did you do that? He hesitated a second before explaining, I was traveling for a while and needed money, so I ended up working on a fishing boat. Long story short, we were close to an oil rig that caught fire and they called for help. I swam there and took the people out, but before they could board the helicopter, the whole structure began to fall down. They wouldn't have time to get away, so I did the only thing I could. I held it for enough time for them to take off. Jessica was looking at him with disbelief etched on her face. How did you get away? She asked finally. I didn't, Clark answered. I managed to hold the oil rig. It was the first time that I actually felt my muscles strain, but I held it until the helicopter got out. Problem was, the steel beam I was standing on started to bend because of the weight and the whole thing came crashing down and exploded. She was experiencing difficulty talking. And you survived this shit? Holy crap, what kind of stubborn son of a bitch are you? Clark sighed. He had a very colorful vocabulary. What else can you do? She questioned, her entire attention on him now. I mean, besides being able to lift oil rigs, surviving explosions, and running faster than a car. Well, this was going to be a long conversation, Clark thought, since sometimes even he was surprised by the number of things his kryptonian physiology allowed him to do, so he decided to shorten it. I can fly. Bullshit, she retorted immediately. No, I really can, he said, a little surprised by her fast reaction to this. Really fly? Or jump very high and fall down somewhat controlled? Because that I can do too. Really fly. Though in the beginning it was more like jumping and falling. Pretty scary thing, I have to say, even knowing I wouldn't get hurt. He looked at her. Maybe you can fly too. You just didn't get the hang of it yet. I could help you. No thank you. The last thing I want to do is jump high enough to be able to die in the landing. I'll keep my super strength and be happy with it. Clark rolled his eyes but didn't press. He too had been worried when he started trying in the Arctic, and he knew for a fact that he wouldn't get hurt, even if he landed on his head. Despite the situation, he was enjoying this talk. The only people who ever listened to him talking about this were his parents. It was nice to talk to someone new, and that she also had her own set of abilities made this even more gratifying. Even if he still was pretty weird compared to the rest of the world, there were some people out there who weren't completely normal too, and he liked that. He opened his mouth to say something else when his eyes caught someone familiar. There is our guy, he said, pointing to the clinic. Jessica used her binoculars to confirm. Yep, and then she turned to him. Pretty good eyes you have there, huh? Before Clark could answer, however, she got up. Come on, we don't want to lose him. Every head at Cassidy Pub turned to look when Natasha entered. To be fair, Natasha turned heads everywhere she went, so it wasn't like the people of this pub were doing something unusual. They were just more open about it than people in other places. Without caring for any of this, Natasha walked to the balcony of the bar and sat down. The bar was full of people eating and drinking. There was a girl singing country music on a stage, and the sound of people talking was only a little bit lower than her performance. Natasha looked for a bartender and asked for a beer, placing a bill on the counter. This was the bar that the alien she was looking for had worked at before he got hired by Arctic Cargo. A common pub, exactly like hundreds of others, full of ordinary people living ordinary lives, and yet she was absolutely sure that neither Thor nor Loki could have worked there and blended in, either because of pride or simply because of a lack of understanding of human culture. It was one more thing that gave credence to her theory that the alien she was looking for was living on Earth for a while, at least long enough to understand the basics of things that should be clear to any human, like serving food, taking orders, keeping a conversation about everyday topics like sports or politics. Thor might have looked human, but he was locked into a hospital hours after arriving on Earth, and even after he got out, he managed to appear on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar almost immediately. Certain things a person could learn only from experience. He was sure she would have trouble blending in on Asgard too, and she had trained her entire life to blend in anywhere. The waitress brought her beer and handed it to her with a smile. Black hair, dark eyes, pretty. So far, she was the only one there that fitted the poor description of the waitress that was groped and helped by the one she was looking for. Natasha smiled back. "It's always this full?" she asked. "At this hour?" "Pretty much. Truckers stop by to lunch," she answered, while cleaning a table nearby. "You look short-staffed." The waitress snorted. "Tell me about it. We've been meaning to hire someone for a few months, but we only got temporary workers. We lost one of ours a while back to another place." "I know," Natasha answered, facing her. "Big guy, blue eyes, dark hair, left to work for Arctic Cargo." The waitress stopped in her tracks, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked sharply. "Someone trying to help him," Natasha said in response. "Could we talk a little bit? Somewhere quieter?" The girl kept staring at Natasha with unfriendly eyes for a few seconds, then agreed. "Come with me." Natasha followed the girl to the back exit, where they left for the cold wind of outside. There was nobody there. "Okay," said the waitress, looking very determined. "Now let's start over. Who are you and what do you want with Clark?" "Clark? Another name. Could that one be real?" "I'm Natasha Romanoff. You might have heard of me from the Avengers," the girl completed, suddenly looking awed and afraid at the same time. "I knew you looked familiar." Natasha smiled, trying to reassure the girl. "And what about you?" "Oh, sorry, I'm Chrissy." She nodded and approached one step. "Chrissy, I meant what I said. I'm trying to help Clark," and she was surprised to notice that she actually meant that. "Why? What happened to him?" Chrissy asked, alarmed. "You know he went to work for Arctic Cargo, right? The army was digging something on Ellesmere Island, and they were hired to help with the transportation of their equipment. There was a theft, however. Important government's property. They want it back." "No. Clark's a good guy. He would never steal something." Natasha put her hand on Chrissy's shoulder. "I believe you, I really do, but nonetheless they ordered me to find him. If I don't, they will order someone else, and this person might not be so convinced that Clark is a good man. So I need your help." Chrissy was frightened and agitated, but she reluctantly agreed. "What do you need to know?" she asked. "His name? What is it?" "Clark Sullivan." "Clark Sullivan. Yet another name. Might be fake too." "How long did Clark work here?" "Not long, just a little bit over a month. He said he needed some cash after moving." "That was interesting. From where did he move from?" she questioned. "He said he came from Cordova, but I don't think he is actually from there. He is American though, of that I am pretty sure." "Why do you say that?" Despite still being scared, Chrissy smiled. "We Canadians can always tell," she answered jokingly. "First there was his accent. I can't place it, but I know it's American. Then maybe the most important thing, hockey wasn't his favorite sport." Natasha gave a little smile in response. "What was it?" "Football. He was always watching it on his breaks. Said it reminded him of his father, how they used to watch every game together." "How well did you know him?" Natasha asked. We were friends. Maybe we could have been something more if he had stayed." He looked at Natasha. "He is a good man, Miss Romanoff. The kind of man you don't see anymore. Always helping, no matter who needed it. Not because he wanted something in return, but because he could. Please remember that when you find him." "I will," he promised, and allowed Chrissy to go back in. Natasha remained there for a while, enjoying the cold wind. This was the first time she talked with someone who had a personal relationship with the one she was looking for, Clark, if the waitress was to be believed. What she learned here seemed to confirm what she had theorized. Everyone said he was a good man, and his actions seemed to confirm that. That was nice. They didn't have another Loki on their hands by the looks of it, and her newest theory, that this alien was living on Earth for a while, was pretty much confirmed too. Not only he had the knowledge to work in a pub, but spoke with an American accent, liked to watch football, and apparently had enough contacts and information on how to forge fake identities. The comment about his father was also on Natasha's mind, Could it be another alien, an even older one, or a human he respected enough to call father? Well, she hoped she would find out soon enough, since she had another lead to follow, Cordova. It was a small city on Alaska, if she wasn't mistaken, previous home of her elusive alien. It was a good thing she had a jet, otherwise this search would take forever. Clark and Jessica had followed Dr. Okamura since he had left the clinic and got into a car, appreciating New York's traffic maybe for the first time, since it made it easier for them to catch up from the rooftops of the buildings and the alleys they used for shortcuts. The doctor had drove to a small warehouse with the Oscorp logo in it and disappeared inside, getting out only an hour later inside a small truck, probably a truck full of the equipment he needed to improve his experiments. The truck stopped so he could get out and enter his own car, then continued to follow the doctor's car through the city. This time it was even easier to follow them, since the truck moved slowly and stood out, so there was no risk of losing it. Not that Clark's vision would lose it anyway. They drove for almost 2 hours, getting away from the crowded streets little by little, until they arrived on a somewhat emptier neighborhood full of factories and warehouses, close to the water. It was almost time for the sun to set when the two vehicles stopped in front of a tall fence, waiting for someone to open the gate for them. Finally, Jessica whispered, as the vehicles entered and continued to the inside of a factory, disappearing. I was beginning to think they wouldn't stop. Tired? Clark asked, curious about her stamina. Just annoyed. She seemed to be telling the truth, which was weird, because a human wouldn't have been able to do what she did without getting exhausted. Whatever happened to her not only made her strong and gave her rapid healing, but also augmented her stamina to superhuman levels. He would have to ask her about it later. Turning his head, Clark looked at the factory Dr. Okamura had entered. It looked very old and not functional at all. He couldn't tell exactly what it used to make, but it probably had something to do with chemical substances from the amount of metal barrels piled on the outside. He looked at Jessica and sighed. He could already see this going badly. Before you asked me what I could do, he started. She didn't even look at him, her eyes on the binoculars. Yeah? What about it? Well, there is one thing I left out. You see, I have pretty good eyesight. I noticed, she deadpanned. Good, but what I meant is that my eyes are so good that I can, see through things, he mumbled quickly. It took a few seconds for Jessica's brain to interpret what he had said, but when it did, all movement halted. She lowered the binoculars slowly, turning her head to him, a very dangerous look on her face. What the hell does that mean? She demanded. It means that I have some sort of X-ray vision. I can see through solid objects. But before you ask, if you looked through my clothes, I would freaking scratch your eyes off. What, I haven't looked through your clothes, he completed, apparently not fast enough. Ma made sure to raise a gentleman. If I did something like this, she would, well, I don't know what she would do, but it wouldn't be nice, I can tell you that much. So no, I didn't look through your clothes or anyone else's, and you have my word, I never will. She looked at him suspiciously for a second, then resumed her watch. Well, he didn't know if she believed him or not, but at least she chose not to fight right now. So I suppose you looked inside the place, Jessica asked, because I'm hoping you brought up this new ability for a reason other than to let me know you could check out my tits anytime you wanted to. What did you see? Clark sighed but didn't take the bait. It's an old factory full of big machines that seem to be collecting dust and metal barrels piled all over. There are some catwalks over the machines. Looks abandoned, at least the part with the machinery. No cameras anywhere. There are other rooms further back with people. I count 13 armed men. Pistols, rifles. Both, he clarified. What is interesting, however, are the lower levels. There is one elevator that goes there, accessed by one hallway. But things look new there, like it's been built not too long ago, unlike the rest of the factory. I can see some stretchers down there and some medical equipment. The people we are looking for are probably there, because he couldn't see it clearly to know for certain. The place was underground, covered in metal and, most likely, surrounded by lead from the old part of the factory. He could see through solid objects, but certain kinds of objects were harder to look through than others. Well, no time like the present then, Jessica said, getting up. only to be stopped by Clark. He looked at her. Look, maybe I should go alone. I can be shot and survive, you can't. She looked surprised at him for a moment. You are bulletproof. I told you I survived an explosion. Why wouldn't I be bulletproof? Shit, I don't know. You just surprised me, she answered, before slapping his hand away. And damn that, I'm going. No way in hell I'm staying outside after all this running around. Clark reluctantly nodded and got up as well. They ran all the way to the fence and tore the wire to go through it. They didn't need tools to do it, simply sliding their hands over the wire as if they were breaking an annoying spider's web. Clark had made sure that nobody was there first, but his first instinct was to look around as they ran to the factory. Even if they could, they didn't enter through the main door, choosing to bend the bars of a window nearby so that they could jump in. As Clark had told Jessica, there was nobody in the machinery room. There were a few lights on, giving a creepy vibe on the dark place as they walked the corridors full of dust. It was more than clear that the place was abandoned, or at least that part was. Moving on through the old and big machinery room, they arrived at a closed door. It wouldn't be anything unusual except that this door wasn't old at all. It stood out in the decrepit room as the only thing new, bright steel and glowing lights on a little keyboard. Great, it's locked, complained Jessica. Clark ignored her for a while, looking at the keyboard. He definitely couldn't see, but to his eyes the fingerprints were clear. He just needed the right combination of the numbers that had marks on them. I can see which numbers were used, but I'm going to need to try the combination, Clark explained, before pressing a few numbers. An unsatisfactory noise made itself heard, and he tried again. Jessica rolled her eyes. Just let me, she said, pushing him to the side. But instead of pressing the numbers on the keyboard, as he thought she would do, she punched the door. Her fist made a huge dent in the steel, and she grabbed it with both hands, forcing the door open with a grunt. See? She smiled. And then the alarm started to sound. Wow. I have no words. Good job. Clark congratulated him, dripping with sarcasm, a hand on his face. A small blush spread through Jessica's face. Okay, that's on me, she admitted, unnecessarily. Without losing any more time, they ran through the door, arriving on another room. Like the previous one, it was also full of machinery, but these looked new. There was lighting here, and the noise the machines made showed them that these were functioning. Aside from the catwalks over them and the doors upstairs, the room had only one corridor, right in front of them, on the other side of the room, and, at the end of it, the elevator that Clark knew would take them down. There were also 3 men on that corridor, holding their rifles in their direction. They dashed behind a big machine as the bullets flew right where they were a second ago. Jessica looked around, searching for something. Without saying a thing, she extended her hand and reached for one of many metal barrels around them. And, with incredible accuracy, she threw it on the men. The barrel bounced on the ground and kept rolling fast, hitting the men on their legs, throwing them upwards with violence. They fell back like rocks and didn't stand up again. Ah! She cheered, just as Clark noticed movement in the rooms upstairs. If the men managed to get to the catwalks, there would be nowhere to hide from their bullets anymore. That wasn't much of a problem to Clark, but Jessica couldn't say the same. So, taking a page from her book, Clark also grabbed a barrel and threw it. Except he did it against an object, so there really was no reason to hold back. The barrel was filled with something and, because of that, extremely heavy. So when Clark tossed it, it moved like a cannonball, hitting the catwalk right on the spot where it connected to the rooms upstairs. The steel from the catwalk was simply ripped away from it, creating a huge hole and preventing anyone from crossing it, at least for now. The noise of the barrel colliding against the wall was deafening. Go off, Jessica simply said, looking forward. They both got up and started to go towards the corridor of the elevator. The alarm was blaring non-stop and they could hear people yelling. That's when there was a bell noise, indicating that the elevator had arrived on their floor. They watched as the doors opened and a woman got out, the same woman he saw last night, breaking that man's neck. He stopped, looking at them. The woman, Angel. if Clark recalled, was tall. She had short, black hair and a very fit physique. Like on the night before, she had a match held on her lips. Without saying anything, almost looking bored, Angel looked around, her eyes stopping at the smashed barrel Jessica had thrown. Very slowly, she walked to it and picked it up. Jessica's eyebrows rose, and then she threw it back at them. Like when Clark did it, she put a lot of her force on it. The thing was barely visible as it crossed the room, splitting the air. By pure reflex, Clark and Jessica stepped to the side, letting the barrel pass in the middle of them, exploding on the wall behind with extraordinary force. "Holy hell!" exclaimed Jessica, eyes wide. Angel walked calmly through the corridor until she arrived at the room with the machines, and, without looking back, she punched a button on the wall. A steel door began to come down from the ceiling, isolating the elevator. Jessica looked at him. "Go, I'll deal with this bitch," she said, as Angel continued to walk towards them. "Are you sure? I've seen her kill a man last night. She is dangerous," said Clark, looking at the door closing slowly. "So am I." Clark nodded, still worried, but started to walk towards the elevator and towards Angel. He would trust Jessica. "You are not going anywhere," stated Angel, almost looking bored. He didn't answer. He just kept walking to her without hesitation. She frowned and raised her fist and punched him, except she didn't hit anything but air. Looking surprised for the first time, Angel looked around, trying to find Clark, only to see him entering the elevator on the far end of the corridor without even acknowledging her. Baring her teeth, Angel turned around, ready to go after him. That's when Jessica's fist collided with the side of her head, throwing her like a rag doll against a pile of barrels. It was on. It wasn't every day that Jessica could really use her strength, even when she tried to be a superhero, convinced by her sister her only opponents had been street thugs, and she couldn't exactly go all out against them, not without killing people in horrific ways with her bare hands. This woman, though, could take a punch, a real one, to the side of her head and get up with barely a scratch. She got up from the pile of barrels like an enraged bull, throwing barrels everywhere as she ran into Jessica, her head hitting her stomach, pushing her back. Jessica lost her breath for a second, trying to keep herself on her feet while the woman pushed her. She brought her fists to the bitch's liver, punching with all her strength, feeling her muscles hardening like a brick wall. She didn't even flinch. Without being able to stop, Jessica braced herself a moment before colliding against the wall, cracking it. She couldn't remember the last time she had hit something this hard. Without losing time, the woman started to punch her non-stop. She felt for the first time what boxers felt when backed into a corner. Each punch she took threw her against the wall, cracking it further. She was beginning to get dizzy, the storm of hits giving her no time to think. In a boxing match, she would be dead in the water, but lucky for her, she never cared much about rules. Holding the woman's arms with her own, Jessica headbutted her in the face, throwing her to the ground. Without waiting for her to catch her breath, he kicked her in the stomach and punched her, only to see her hand break the ground as the woman dodged and moved her legs to drop Jessica to the ground. She felt her throat tighten when the woman grabbed her on a chokehold. She elbowed her and tried to get away, but she just wouldn't budge. "That's it. Keep fighting," the woman whispered in her ear. "It won't make a difference. You're already mine." Jessica, of course, fought even harder. "When you pass out, we're going to fit you with a control collar. The things I'm going to make you do." Her vision began to blacken. Suddenly, Jessica wasn't in an old factory anymore, fighting a woman. She was in the middle of a street, walking away as a man yelled at her. "Get back here, Jessica." She opened her eyes with a jolt. "No, oh!" she yelled, strength flowing through her muscles again. Her legs tensed against the ground, cracking it, and she pushed all her strength in them, jumping. She and the woman were thrown in the air, colliding against the wall, the bricks breaking on impact, and then she was free once again. Without caring about her wounds, Jessica got up and punched the woman in the face, so strongly that her head went back against the wall and broke it. And then she punched again and again and again, her hands turning into blurs as she unleashed her fury. "Never again, never," she yelled over and over, the woman beginning to disappear into the brick wall. Jessica didn't care. The person she was hitting wasn't exactly there anyway. Going back one step, she prepared all the muscles on her body, lifted her fist, and gave one last devastating punch against her opponent's face. Her head was embedded in the wall. "Take this, you bitch," she spat. She got away from the woman, breathing hard, tired as hell but feeling a thrill like she hasn't in a long time. That's when she heard the rifles being aimed at her from the catwalk upstairs. The elevator's doors barely opened and Clark was already out. He could hear the sounds of the fighting upstairs, the room shaking at times, but he ignored that and looked around. What he saw took the words out of his mouth. It wasn't a lab. It wasn't an infirmary. What he saw down there could only be described as a torture room. There were electrified racks with shackles on it, plastic containers filled with melting ice, big enough to fit a person, chains on the ceiling where people could lift it like punching bags, little cages right by the side of hoses, presumably so the prisoners could be soaked with freezing water, bathtubs filled with filthy water to drown people. Clark couldn't believe what he was seeing. He knew these people were performing experiments on people, but that was beyond anything he could have imagined. Forcing himself, he looked around, looking at the people cuffed to the stretchers, barely conscious. He walked towards the first one, a man with some kind of IV fluid attached to his arm. The man looked at him with terror and closed his eyes as soon as he got close. "Please, please, please, just kill me." There were no words to describe how lost Clark was at that moment. That's when he heard the click of a gun behind him. "Stop right there," said a voice he recognized as belonging to Dr. Okamura, pointing a gun to his back. "Don't move." Clark didn't move, but not because he had been ordered. "Now turn around very slow." "Were you the one who did this?" Clark interrupted, his voice tense even to his ears. "Were you the one who tortured these people?" Dr. Okamura was so surprised to be cut off that he didn't answer for a second. "Tortured? Oh no, I have more important things to do with my time. Now turn around." "But you knew about this," Clark stated. "Well, of course I knew. It's part of the treatment. Nothing raises adrenaline like pain." "Why?" "What do you mean, why? Without stimuli, the X gene wouldn't activate, not even with the serum." "You are making mutants?" "I'm making the future," he corrected. "Back on the World War II, the making of one super soldier was what turned the tide of the war. The making of Captain America shaped the century. What I'm doing here will as well. Your future will be the inside of a prison cell." Dr. Okamura laughed. "Do you think anyone cares about what happens here? Armies all over the world will pay fortunes for one single mutant created in this workshop. Normal people, people like me and you, well, we only have a place on the battlefield as cannon fodder now. Captain America saw to that. The Avengers saw to that. You need extraordinary weapons to fight extraordinary weapons. Does this government know? They don't know because they know better than to ask questions. There are people on key positions inside the army and the government that make sure it stays that way. And why would they care anyway? They made worse things." Clark didn't say anything for a few seconds. "These people, will they live?" "Maybe, I don't know. It depends on how they react to the serum. And it depends if they have a dormant X gene too. It doesn't matter. There are always more subjects." He pointed the gun to Clark more assertively. "Now shut up and turn around." Before he could even finish what he was about to say, Clark was already in front of him, his hand crushing the pistol alongside the doctor's bones. Dr. Okamura screamed, helpless, only to be grabbed by the back of his head and dragged to the man on the stretch. "He is not a subject," Clark yelled, forcing Dr. Okamura to look at the man. "He is not an experiment. He is a person. God, you are one of them." Dr. Okamura screeched, more afraid than he ever was on his life. "You are a freak." "No, I'm much more than that, Dr. Okamura." He lifted the doctor in the air. "Now tell me the names of the people in charge or I'm going to hold you responsible for everything here." "I don't know." "Now, my notebook. It has emails, documents, transactions. Just please let me go." Clark did let him go, with strength against the ground. The doctor stayed down, unconscious. Forcing himself to calm down despite everything he had just learned, Clark concentrated his hearing to see how Jessica was doing. The sounds of the fight had stopped. He could hear Jessica's breathing pattern and heartbeat, but he also could listen to the heartbeat of 10 men as well, probably holding rifles by the sound. Turning around, Clark looked up. It would take too long to take the elevator again and breaking the steel door that had sealed the corridor. He needed to be a little more direct. He kneeled on the ground, focusing all his energy. Small objects all around him began to float. He contracted his muscles, preparing himself to fly, and took off. Boom! Jessica didn't know what the hell had just hit the building, but it felt like an atomic bomb had just fallen on top of them. The entire factory trembled. She and everything else in the room fell to the ground. All the lights turned off, replaced by the red glow of the emergency ones. The machine stopped working, and the only sound was the alarm blaring and the sound of metal bending. The steel door that had sealed the corridor to the elevator began to fold itself, as if something were forcing it open. The armed men on the top of the catwalks got up, their hands shaking with fear as they tried to see what was behind that door. A pair of red eyes ignited in the dark. "Open fire!" yelled one man. Before they could fire, however, a pair of red energy beams crossed the room, melting the steel support of the catwalks. The entire structure then came crashing down, tumbling the armed men to the ground, and then he was there, already on them, as if he had appeared from nowhere. Jessica could only watch as the dark figures moved under the red lights of the dark room. Clark picked one man from the ground as he tried to stand up, lifting him in front of him as if he didn't weigh anything, and dashed to the front, using the man he was holding like some sort of shield. He bashed his human shield against one of the men, throwing him to the other side of the room. Without even looking, he punched a man by his side, sending him down, before using the man he was holding to hit another man. 3 thugs managed to get up and point their rifles at him, but Clark simply tossed the man he was holding onto them, knocking all 4 of them down in a tangle of limbs. One of the armed men appeared from the other side of the collapsed catwalk and managed to shoot. Jessica was baffled as she saw Clark simply move his hand across the air and slap the bullet to the side, deflecting it directly to the leg of an approaching enemy. The man fell down screaming, only to be picked up and launched against the shooter. The only man left standing didn't even try to fight. He simply discarded his rifle and began walking backwards, exactly like someone unarmed would do when faced with an approaching tiger. The man was so damn scared he didn't even notice he was walking right in her direction. That was a little insulting, so she bitch-slapped him into oblivion. Jessica looked at Clark, her jaw dropped. When she managed, she said the following: "So, I guess you forgot to tell me a few of your abilities, huh?" As soon as Clark was certain Jessica was all right, much to her very verbal displeasure, both of them got back into the lab/torture room. He still couldn't manage to stop flinching every time he saw the things down there, and, apparently, he wasn't the only one bothered by it. "What the hell? What did those 6 sons of bitches did here?" she exclaimed, a disgusted expression on her face. "They were trying to create mutants out of non-mutants," said Clark, looking around for Dr. Okamura's notebook. "Do you remember the doctor's thesis about activating a dormant X gene? But why the medieval torture room?" Jessica demanded, still unable to look away. "To raise their adrenaline, make the serum work. I'm guessing they didn't really care that the mortality rate wasn't low," he added somberly. Finally finding the computer, Clark started to look for everything regarding the experiments in it. To a human, that would take days, but Clark's eyesight, memory, and rapid thinking process made it take a lot less. All he had to do was glance at the documents, rolling down as fast as he could, and everything would be safely committed to his mind. "Jessica, start taking pictures," he said. "What? Why?" She turned to him, shocked. "I need evidence for my story," he answered, without looking at her. He did have to look at her when she grabbed him. "Are you freaking kidding me? There are people dying here and you are worried about a freaking story," he yelled at him. Clark grabbed her and pushed her to the front of the computer, at the end of his patience after all he had witnessed that day. "Look at this," he demanded. She tried to move, but he held her. "Look at it. Do you see the names? Do you see where they work? There are powerful people involved in this. turning a blind eye to everything happening here. If we call the police now, without finding the proof first, all of this will go away. It will be like it never happened. Only the dead will remain dead. The people who did this will keep on killing and everything will remain the same. Jessica looked at him, maybe surprised to see him sounding serious for once. We need to reveal everything happening here, Jessica. Otherwise they won't stop. So please help me. Still silenced, Jessica nodded, getting her cell phone to begin taking the pictures. What are you going to do? She asked. Clark didn't answer for a second. I'll read everything as fast as I can and then I'm going to beat my own record of the most quickly written story in the world. She turned to him. You've got to be shitting me. You are writing this now. Only chance we'll have, he explained. The moment we call the authorities, they'll take everything and we are done. The people here aren't exactly all right, but they aren't at risk of dying. They can wait for an hour. Saying this, Clark began to type his story as Jessica took the pictures, his fingers moving as fast as the computer allowed. Taking his cell phone from his pocket, he dialed a number while still typing one-handed. Mr. Ellison. Clark Kent. I'm sorry to bother you now, but I have a story, and it's a big one.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.